10 days before our annual spring gala, the head florist at the Mercer Grand Theater caught me by the wrist, looked over both shoulders and said, "Do not go into that ballroom yet. Your son-in-law is in there rehearsing your life away." I almost laughed. Bernadette Rousseau had worked events for us for 12 years. She was brilliant with orchids, merciless with underpaid caterers, and prone to speaking in complete judgments when most people were still collecting facts. If she said the hydrangeas were dying, you watered them. If she said the soprano was drunk, you hid the champagne. But even by Bernadette's standards, that sentence was dramatic. "Rehearsing my life away," I repeated. She tightened her grip. "Quietly, Thomas." That was what changed everything. Not the words, the tone. People who gossip lean forward. People who panic talk too fast. People who know they are about to hand you a blade lower their voices and stop blinking. Bernadette pulled me behind a wall of white peonies and ivory roses, waiting to be rolled into the ballroom after the donor preview. We were tucked between service drapes and a stack of lighting cases. Through a gap in the velvet, I could see the edge of the stage, the first two banquet tables, and the family rehearsal area we used every year before the room opened. I heard Daniel first. "Tonight is the cleanest window we're going to get," he said in that smooth, measured voice he used when he wanted other people to feel childish for hesitating. "He'll be sentimental. The board will be distracted. Once Anna signs the trust amendments and the proxy transfer, the sale moves before anyone has time to get theatrical about the building." Another voice answered, Miriam Cole, our family attorney for 9 years. Dry voice, precise, expensive. "And if she gets unstable?" Daniel gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Julian will handle her. He always has." Dr. Julian Reddick, psychiatrist, the man who had spent 4 years telling me that my daughter needed structure, distance, and patience. The man I had trusted because he spoke sorrow like it was a discipline. Then came his voice from behind the curtain. "She will sign," he said. "The child contingent still works. It always works. What concerns me is Thomas. If he learns Celia is alive before the paperwork clears, he may become difficult." I remember not breathing. Not because I was trying to be silent, because my lungs forgot what their job was. Celia Hart, the stage manager my daughter had supposedly killed in the fire 4 years earlier. Miriam said, "Then he cannot learn that." Daniel replied, almost lightly, "He won't. Not unless someone gets sloppy. He still thinks Anna is in Nova Scotia. He still thinks the carriage house is storage. And by the time he notices anything, I'll own the voting block, the property package, and the air rights." There are moments when the human mind behaves like a coward. It does not reject the truth. It shrinks it. Mine did that. For one stupid second, I focused on the phrase air rights. Not Celia alive, not Anna, not carriage house. Air rights over the old theater district. That was what Daniel had been pushing for in the developer negotiations. The land above and around the Mercer Grand. The same building Eleanor and I had spent 28 years restoring. The same building Anna learned to walk in while stagehands argued over rigging lines and orchestra chairs. Then Julian said the sentence that made the rest of the room snap into focus. "If Thomas asks to see her after tonight, tell him regression. Use the child if necessary. He still responds to family guilt faster than evidence." I think Bernadette felt me move because she tightened her hand again until her nails bit through my sleeve. Inside the rehearsal space, chairs scraped. Miriam asked, "And if Anna mentions Celia?" Daniel answered immediately, "She won't. She still thinks that night ended the same way we told her it did. She's easier now when the light cues are consistent. Lily's drawings help. If she drifts, we remind her what happens to children when unstable women make selfish choices." My daughter had supposedly been living in a private trauma recovery program on the coast of Nova Scotia for 4 years. Every quarter, I had wired her husband $18,000. Money for specialist supervision, money for discreet care, money for travel teams, medication management, and all the vague, soft-edged professional language grief teaches you to accept because the alternative is asking whether your own child is being erased right in front of you. Behind the curtain, Daniel lowered his voice. "Once the gala is done, I want the old man managed too. The sooner we move him off board authority, the sooner this stops being a family negotiation and becomes paperwork." Miriam did not even sound surprised. "We still have the capacity draft," Julian said. "He's more functional than Anna. That will take finesse." Daniel laughed. "Then be subtle. I don't care if you call it fatigue, grief, blood pressure, or legacy planning. I am done dragging a sentimental widower across the finish line of his own company." There is a point in every betrayal where pain becomes almost mathematical. You stop hearing the words as wounds and start hearing structure. Timing, dependency, sequence. Who knew what? When? Why? That was the moment I understood three things at once. My daughter was not in Nova Scotia. Celia Hart had not died in the fire, or at least not in the way Anna had been made to believe, and the carriage house behind Daniel's estate had not been holding storage. It had been holding my daughter. Bernadette leaned toward my ear and whispered, "I have more." I turned to her with my face so numb it felt borrowed. "How long have you known?" "Not long enough," she said. "Long enough to hate it. I was in the carriage corridor Tuesday night placing the rehearsal arrangements. I heard piano through the wall. Then I saw Daniel kill the sound with that porch switch and tell the little girl to be a brave helper. Today I heard Celia's name. I put it together. Barely. Through the drape, Daniel was still talking. I want Anna backstage at 7:30. No wandering, no improvising, no public emotion unless it's useful. Miriam, you get the folders ready. Julian, you steady her if she gets grandiose. If Thomas wants a recorded update for the donors, we give him one. Something soft, something grateful. The room loves resilience. I had spent my entire adult life inside theaters. I know what rehearsal sounds like. I know the difference between genuine conversation and lines being tested for effect. I know what it means when a man stops speaking like a husband and starts speaking like a director who expects every object in the room to hit its mark. Behind that curtain, Daniel was not discussing family. He was cueing a production, and my daughter was somewhere behind a locked door being taught her own lines. I did not confront them then. That would have satisfied pain, not truth. Instead, I stood behind the flowers and listened until there was nothing left in the room but scheduling, signatures, and donor optics. Bernadette slipped a small silver recorder into my palm before we separated. "I turned it on when I saw them come in," she said. "Take it." I closed my fingers around it. The little device felt ridiculous, too small for what it now held, like a thimble catching a flood. When I stepped back into the lobby 2 minutes later, the Mercer Grand looked exactly the way it always looked before Gala night. Marble floors, dustless brass, old chandelier light resting on polished banisters. The posters Eleanor had commissioned during the restoration years lined up along the corridor in gold frames. My wife smiling down at me from a black and white portrait near the donor wall, one hand tucked behind her back, eyes amused by some private thought I would never hear now. If she had been alive, none of this would have lasted 4 months, let alone 4 years. That is not self-pity, it is fact. Eleanor Mercer had 2 gifts I did not. She could hear false sweetness before it finished forming, and she understood that people who always positioned themselves as the calmest person in the room were usually hiding the most. I wish I could tell you that I drove home shaking and immediately became strategic. That is not what happened. I drove to the old parking lot behind Bay 3 of the Mercer Scene Shop and sat there for 40 minutes with the engine off while the late afternoon light moved across the windshield. I thought about Nova Scotia, about every transfer, about the updates Daniel sent on clinic letterhead that always managed to say a great deal and absolutely nothing, about Lily once asking me, over pancakes, whether people in Canada could still hear thunder from Pennsylvania, about the little upright piano Eleanor kept in the carriage house after we moved it off the stage of the Rosen Playhouse, about how often Daniel discouraged me from visiting his property because Lily needed routine, and Anna needed distance, and grief made everyone do strange things. Grief did not make this happen. Greed did. Control did. And my own willingness to let sorrow answer ordinary questions did the rest. By the time I finally turned the key in the ignition, I knew exactly who I was calling. Not the police. Not yet. I called Nora Bellamy. Nora had been Eleanor's law school roommate, my favorite opponent at dinner, and the only probate litigator in 3 counties who could say the words temporary guardianship in a tone that made grown men confess to things they had not technically done yet. She had represented families tearing each other apart over paintings, medical directives, lake houses, and the right to choose who got moved into which facility when memory and money started drifting too close together. If there was a legal shape to what Daniel had built, Nora would see it faster than I would. She answered on the 3rd ring. "If this is another donor asking whether the lamb is local, I'm hanging up." "It's me." A pause. "Then Thomas? I need you tonight." She was silent just long enough for me to hear the change in her. What kind of need? The kind with paper, money, my daughter, and maybe a locked building. Nora did not ask for details on the phone. She just said, "Put coffee on. I'll be there in 20. That is the difference between useful people and merely sympathetic ones. Useful people postpone the gasp until after they get through your door. By 7:15, the recorder sat on my kitchen table beside 4 years of transfer confirmations, update letters, clinic summaries, and the leather-bound donor program Eleanor designed the year before she died. Nora walked in wearing a dark coat, practical shoes, and the expression of a woman already irritated with reality on my behalf. She looked at the spread on the table, looked at my face, and said, "All right, tell me how bad." So I did. Every word I had heard behind the curtain, every number I had paid, every mention of Celia alive, every reference to the carriage house, every line about using Lily. Every draft of my own removal Daniel seemed to think was just another scheduling item on Gala night. Nora listened without interrupting. When I finished, she picked up the recorder, rewound it, listened to 40 seconds of Daniel's voice, and shut it off. Then she looked at me and said the sentence that began the real story. "Your son-in-law has been staging your grief." I met Daniel Cross on a Tuesday in late September, under rehearsal lights so hot they made everyone look slightly dishonest. Anna was 30 then. She had just come off a brutal but successful season restoring the Rosen Annex into a chamber venue, and had started doing what Eleanor always said she would eventually do, which was stop apologizing for being the smartest person in the room. Daniel was a finance consultant at the time, or that was how he introduced himself. He wore good suits, asked calm questions, remembered names too fast, and had the sort of polished attentiveness that reads as kindness if you are not careful. He did not love the theater, exactly. He loved systems. He loved the numbers under the velvet and paint, ticket flow, donor tiers, capital structures, insurance, tax overlays, endowment pressure points. He could talk for 20 minutes about deferred maintenance and somehow make it sound like seduction. Eleanor distrusted him by desert. Not openly. She was too civilized for that. But when we got home, she stood at the sink, rolled up the sleeves of her black dress and said, "He looks at people the way a man looks at acreage." I asked what on earth that meant. She dried her hands and turned toward me. "It means he notices value before he notices humanity." Then she shrugged, kissed my cheek, and told me not to make a face because I always chose poor men to like and suspicious men to defend. Eleanor had a habit of being right early. I had a habit of appreciating that only after events made it embarrassing not to. Anna loved him anyway, or thought she did. Maybe love is too simple a word for what people do when someone arrives right at the intersection of admiration, exhaustion, and timing. Daniel was useful. Daniel was calm. Daniel was ambitious in ways that looked like competence, and protective in ways that looked like devotion. And after Eleanor got sick, usefulness became very hard to distinguish from goodness. That is how some men enter families. Not through the front door of affection. Through the side entrance, grief leaves propped open. The year Eleanor was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, the Mercer organization was already halfway through the ugliest expansion fight of my career. Developers wanted air rights over the district. The board wanted new money, but no public fight. Donors wanted the illusion that preservation could somehow happen without conflict. Anna wanted to save 3 crumbling properties at once and believed budgets were moral documents. I wanted Eleanor not to die. None of those desires fit well together. Daniel became indispensable in the way dangerous people often do. He offered to take pressure off Anna. He handled lenders. He calmed trustees. He took calls I no longer had the patience for, and quietly started becoming the voice other people heard when they wanted an answer from our family, but not necessarily from me. By the time Eleanor was too weak to climb the grand staircase without stopping, Daniel knew which board members feared debt, which donors feared controversy, and which staff members resented Anna for inheriting vision without having to inherit age. He knew too much. I thought that meant he cared. It is humiliating to write that, but humiliation is sometimes just memory without self-protection. Anna married him 9 months after Eleanor's funeral. Small ceremony, private, late spring, no orchestra, no donor seating chart, no press. Lily came 2 years later and looked, from the first hour, like someone who had arrived with opinions. Big gray eyes, stubborn mouth, hands always reaching for texture. She hated lace, loved brass buttons, and as a toddler, used to toddle into rehearsal rooms and stand motionless whenever the piano started. Anna said she felt music in her ribs before she understood she was hearing it. Lily seemed built the same way. Those first 2 years after Lily was born were the closest I ever came to believing Eleanor had been wrong about Daniel. He did what attentive husbands in good stories do. Packed lunches, changed diapers, learned the timing of nap schedules, brought Anna coffee at the office, talked about simplification, stability, family pace. When trustees praised him for being steady, I felt relieved. When staff began going to him first with financial questions, I told myself that was normal. When he started suggesting Anna should pull back from the most stressful public roles and focus on creative oversight, I even agreed with him. That is how a quiet coup begins. Not with obvious theft, with helpful redistribution. A little less pressure for her, a little more structure from him, a little more mediation, a little more gatekeeping, a little more translation of what Anna really meant after difficult meetings, a little more explanation on her behalf, a little more calm. If you spread that over enough months, people stopped noticing who moved what. The fire happened in October. It was supposed to be a rehearsal dinner for the Mercer Arts Trust anniversary weekend. Not even a performance. Just a donor preview of the restored East Wing at the Rosen Annex with live piano, lighting demonstrations, soft drinks, speeches, and the sort of expensive cheese boards that always make ordinary people angry when the budget lines later become public. Celia Hart was stage managing the event. I liked Celia. At least I thought I did. She was efficient in a way that can make competence look like innocence. Mid-30s, quick smile, hair always pinned up badly because she never stopped moving long enough to fix it twice. She had come in through the summer crew and stayed because Anna trusted her under pressure. That should have mattered more. When you build a life around theaters, you learn to trust the people who can solve problems while holding a flashlight in their teeth. Maybe that is why what came later worked so well. The whole scheme wore backstage clothes. That night, Anna and I had argued 30 minutes before the fire. Nothing dramatic, nothing unforgivable. A board issue. She wanted to postpone the developer conversation until after the anniversary weekend. I wanted the trustees kept warm. Daniel sided with nobody in the room and somehow still left as the most reasonable person in it. Anna had been exhausted for weeks. Too much planning, too little sleep. Too much pressure from donors who wanted poetry on stage and spreadsheets off stage. Julian Reddick had started seeing her that summer for anxiety and grief reactivation, which was his polished way of saying my daughter carried pressure like a live current and still had not finished mourning her mother. I remember seeing him in the lobby just before the preview began. No invitation badge, no donor program, just Daniel's hand on his shoulder like he belonged there. At the time, I thought Daniel had brought him because Anna was strained. That thought makes me angry even now. I was still translating every oddity into care. The fire started in the East Loft 23 minutes after the guests arrived. Not a theatrical fireball, not a movie, something worse. Real fire begins in confusion. A smell first, then somebody looking up, then a crackle where there should not be one, then a shout that sounds half embarrassed because no one wants to be the first idiot to scream in a crowded room. Smoke rolled out of the catwalk wing. People moved badly. Too fast in the wrong directions. Some toward the exits, some toward the stairs, some toward the thing itself, because humans remain, in crisis, astonishingly hopeful that if they just get close enough, confusion will become information. I remember Daniel pushing donors toward the lobby with a voice built for command. I remember sprinklers failing to activate in the east corridor when they should have. I remember stagehands trying to get up the access stairs and being waved back by Celia, who shouted that there was someone still inside. That someone, according to the story I was later given, was Celia herself, or rather that she went back for archived cue books and Anna failed to stop her. That was the structure Daniel and Julian spent months building in my daughter's mind. Not that Anna committed arson, not that she murdered anyone on purpose. That would have been easier to reject. No, they built something more poisonous. They told her exhaustion and carelessness and one badly timed decision had turned her into the kind of woman who let somebody die. They said she had overruled a safety delay. They said she had pushed the lighting test while the loft still smelled hot. They said Celia went back up after Anna snapped at her. They said guilt was accurate. They said panic would make juries cruel. They said with Lily so young and the board so exposed and the press so hungry for scandal, discretion was the only mercy left. By the time I got to Anna that night, she was sitting on the loading dock with soot on her cheek and blood on her sleeve that did not belong to her. She looked at me once and said, "I think I killed her." Then she vomited beside the prop bins. The human mind marks itself around sentences like that. I have been alive 70 years. I have signed payroll during recessions, sat through my wife's chemo briefings, and once identified a dead stagehand after a rigging collapse in Cleveland when I was 38. Nothing ever sounded like my daughter saying that. Julian appeared within minutes. How convenient that feels now. How damning. He crouched in front of Anna, put one hand lightly on her shoulder, and started talking to her in that same soft, expensive voice. "Not now," he said. "You do not tell the story in panic. You stabilize first. Daniel backed him instantly. Anna, listen to me. The police are everywhere. Reporters will get here any minute. Lily is at home with Beth. You need to breathe. Let Julian help you. I remember saying, "Where is Celia?" Daniel answered before anybody else could. "They haven't found her yet." That line matters now because it was true and false at once. They had not found her, because they had arranged for her not to be found. But I did not know that then. I only knew smoke, sirens, and my daughter breaking apart on a loading dock, while my son-in-law and a psychiatrist seemed determined to keep every explanation moving through them first. Over the next 72 hours, the official language hardened. No body recovered in the initial search. Structural instability, restricted access, preliminary indications of electrical failure, interviews pending, press statements deferred. But inside the family, Daniel and Julian built a more intimate version. Anna should not speak yet. Anna's recall was compromised by shock. Anna might distort sequence. Anna needed sedation, rest, isolation, clinical discretion. Anna loved Lily, and if she loved Lily, she would avoid a public spiral before facts were controlled. Controlled. That word appears so often in my memories of that period, it might as well have been printed on our wallpaper. Then came the first disappearance. Not Celia's, Anna's. Daniel told me Julian had arranged a private evaluation team in Philadelphia. Then that the evaluation had turned up severe guilt fixation. Then that sleep deprivation and traumatic stress made public exposure dangerous. Then that one of Julian's colleagues knew an excellent discreet facility in Nova Scotia where grief-linked trauma and event-related dissociation could be handled away from press and board interference. He did not present it as a decision. He presented it as the humane thing already in motion. I should have stopped him. I know that. I know it in the abstract, and I know it with the kind of concrete nausea memory can induce years later. But the truth is I was operating on 3 damaged beliefs at once. First, that Daniel wanted to protect Anna. Second, that Julian understood minds the way carpenters understand load. Third, that a father asking too many procedural questions while his daughter whispered, "I killed her," might be making everything worse. So I signed the first transfer, then the second, then the third. And because grief is never content to hurt only once, the absence hardened into routine. Anna was unstable but responsive, then responsive but fragile, then fragile but improving, then no visits recommended, then short supervised calls unhelpful, then voice contact discouraged because Lily's developmental attachment needed protection. Then there were written updates, then recordings, then less and less. Every quarter, Daniel sent numbers. Every quarter, Julian sent language. Every quarter, I paid for both. And somewhere in that stretch of years, my daughter stopped existing as a person I could reach and became a clinical weather report delivered by the man with access. That was what Daniel had rehearsed behind the flowers. Not just the sale, the erasure. By the time Nora finished listening to the first hour of all this in my kitchen, she had built 3 neat piles on the table: money, medical language, trust exposure. Then she looked at me and said, "We start with paper. The law hates monsters less than it hates sloppy paperwork." That was why I called her. Not because she made things feel better, because she made them measurable. She picked up the earliest Nova Scotia packet, skimmed 2 pages, and snorted. "This is written for donors, not family." What does that mean? It means nobody treating a real patient writes like this unless they're billing an institution or performing gentleness. Look, structured emotional containment, low stimulus integration, family contact remains clinically contraindicated pending regression thresholds. This is fog, Thomas, professional fog. Then she tapped the signature line. Also, Julian changes titles 3 times in 16 months. Consultant, director, senior consultant. That usually means either vanity or false templates. I stared at the table. Nora put on her glasses and leaned closer. Tonight we copy everything. Tomorrow I start pulling records. If your daughter was really admitted where they said, there will be traceable intake. If Celia Hart really died in that fire, there will be traceable death documentation. And if the carriage house behind Daniel's property has had any recent permitting or structural modifications, I want those too. And if we're right, she met my eyes, then your Gala is no longer the center of this story. She was wrong about that. The Gala would become the center, just not in the way Daniel intended. Nora arrived the next morning with a portable scanner, 2 legal pads, and the merciless energy of a woman who had already canceled 3 lesser people. My kitchen became a war room by 9. Transfer confirmations, clinic letters, Julian's summaries, Daniel's emails, copies of trust schedules, property tax packets, insurance correspondence from the fire, board memoranda, old event maps from the Rosen Annex, Everything I had spread and categorized until my house looked less like a home and more like evidence that had finally found a flat surface. Useful work has a smell. Paper dust, coffee, the faint metal heat of machine parts doing exactly what they were made to do. By noon, Nora had found the first inconsistency big enough to make us both go quiet. There was a discharge reference, not a full discharge packet. Just a routing entry buried in a reimbursement acknowledgement. Daniel had once forwarded to reassure me that the Nova Scotia program was transitioning Anna into a lower intensity phase. Phase. Always phase. The routing entry referenced a handoff date, 4 years and 3 months earlier. Destination site, residential continuity placement, Mercer Lane Property Annex, Pennsylvania. I read that line 3 times. Mercer Lane was Daniel's road. Property Annex was a bland way to say outbuilding. Pennsylvania was not Nova Scotia. That's the carriage house, I said. Nora nodded once. No institution in Canada hands off to a residential placement on your son-in-law's property without a very clear, very papered legal framework. Which he doesn't have. Which he'd need if this were lawful and she were unwilling, Nora said. If she were willing, he wouldn't need all the nonsense language about regression every time you asked to see her. That was the thing about Nora. She did not dramatize when the facts were already loud enough. By 1:30, she had found a second gap. No death certificate under Celia Hart, not in county records, not statewide, not under probable spelling variants, not under delayed filing, not under Burns unit transfers that later converted to fatalities. Nothing. I paced the length of the kitchen twice before speaking. What if the certificate is under another county? Possible, but people do not vanish neatly after a publicly documented fire tied to an arts trust and insurance claim, not without effort. Could the body have been unrecovered? Nora looked down at the fire packet. For 4 years, with no final adjudication, no insurance closure language addressing presumed death, no estate filing, no next of kin petition, no labor claim continuation? No, either Celia Hart lived or somebody worked professionally to make her disappear without ever becoming legally dead. I stopped pacing. Professionally, yes. I thought about Julian, about Daniel, about calm voices on loading docks telling me not to let panic become story. Nora kept reading. By late afternoon, she found the clinic itself. Or rather, she found what existed of it. The Nova Scotia facility Daniel had described so often by name was real enough on paper. Private, high-end, trauma-adjacent, discreet. The sort of place rich families sent people when they wanted treatment and privacy to sound interchangeable. Anna had been there for 5 months, not 4 years. 5 months. Then she was discharged to residential continuity, Pennsylvania. Mercer Lane Property Annex. Nora read the line aloud twice, maybe because she knew I needed to hear it become real outside my own head. My daughter had not been hidden overseas for 4 years. She had been hidden 27 minutes from my house. I sat down so hard the chair legs complained. Nora softened then, only a little. Enough, she said. Thomas. I looked up. We are past suspicion. Outside, somebody's dog barked twice. A truck downshifted on the county road. A plane cut across the far blue above the maples. The world kept performing ordinary noise while the structure of my last 4 years collapsed into something that finally had walls. At 5:20, Lily called. Children never pick their moments for you. They simply enter them. Grandpa, she said, are you still taking me for waffles tomorrow? Yes. Can we do the diner with the red booths? We can do the diner with the red booths. Okay, a pause. Then she lowered her voice. Mom likes the rain on the carriage roof. It sounds louder than the clinic roof. My hand tightened around the phone. Nora did not move, but her eyes lifted immediately. I kept my voice level. That's interesting, sweetheart. It's not interesting, Lily said. It's sad. Then, with the bluntness children reserve for truth, adults keep misfiling as imagination, she added. She says songs sound smaller in there. I closed my eyes. When did she tell you that? Through the vent. That was it, the real sentence. Simple as a dropped glass, through the vent. There are times when rage does not arrive as heat. It arrives as stillness. Every moving part inside you stops at once, because if even one of them kept going, you might break something alive. I asked Lily where Daniel was. She said at the theater. I asked where she was. She said home with Beth, the weekday nanny. I asked if Beth knew about the vent. Lily said no. Beth never goes by the carriage because Dad says that's where the bad quiet lives. The bad quiet. Children are always taking notes. After I hung up, Nora stood up, crossed to the sink, and poured us both more coffee neither of us needed. Then she said, we go see the house. That evening, we parked a little over a block from Daniel's place and watched the last of the sunlight fade off the property line. Daniel's home had started as a 1920s carriage property at the edge of the old Mercer estate. Stone main house, Detached carriage building out back, gravel turnaround, one line of white birch at the rear fence. The kind of place magazines call tasteful and people with staff call manageable. From the street it looked like every other expensive home pretending not to be expensive. At 7:12 the kitchen lights came on. At 7:23 a smaller lamp lit the carriage house window. At 7:28 the porch fixture outside the carriage door blinked twice. Not by chance, not by weather, deliberate. 2 measured cuts of light. Nora lifted the binoculars. "Did you tell me Lily mentioned signals?" "Yes. What did she say exactly?" "That when the porch light blinks, her mother stops playing." We both listened. For almost 10 seconds there was nothing but evening insects and the distant wash of traffic from Route 14. Then from the rear structure, faint through glass and insulated walls, came 4 clear notes on a piano. A pause, then silence. Nora lowered the binoculars and said, "Storage doesn't respond to cues." At 7:41, Beth emerged with Lily onto the back patio. Lily held a coloring book in one hand and looked once, quickly, toward the carriage house before Daniel stepped out the back door, carrying what looked like a tray. He said something to Beth. She nodded and guided Lily back inside. Daniel walked the tray to the carriage door, keyed in a code, entered, and came back out 3 minutes later without the tray. Routine. Comfortable routine. The kind that only happens when horror has been running long enough to become habit for the person administering it. I wanted to go through the yard right then. Nora saw it happen in me. The shift. The idiotic forward lean of a man about to satisfy rage at the cost of every useful step after it. She said very quietly, "If he sees you tonight, your daughter disappears tomorrow." I stayed in the truck. Sometimes restraint is not virtue. It is the most violent thing available that still protects the person you are trying to save. By 9, we knew enough to hate the house properly. We knew the light cue existed. We knew someone responded to it. We knew Daniel carried food or medication to the carriage house. We knew Lily had contact through a vent. We knew Beth either knew nothing or had trained herself not to ask. We knew my daughter was close enough to hear rain on the same roofline as her own child, and far enough from freedom that a blinking porch light controlled whether she could finish a song. Back at my kitchen, Nora made 2 lists. One was legal. Property access, emergency welfare check thresholds, probable cause weaknesses, financial subpoena paths, guardianship angles, medical fraud exposure. The other was practical. Who had keys? Who knew the old carriage construction? Who could open a lock without turning it into a public event? Who might still know the annex electrical routes from before Daniel added the renovations? Who had reasons to help my family that were stronger than gossip, but quieter than panic? At the top of that second list, she wrote one name, Gus Pritchard. Gus had been head carpenter at the Rosen for 26 years. He built sets, repaired trapdoors, hated modern LED candles, and once told a consultant from Boston that minimalist was just a tax bracket pretending to be taste. He had also installed the original acoustic paneling in the Mercer carriage house, back when Eleanor used it as a rehearsal studio for donor recitals. If anyone knew how to get into that building without announcing himself to the neighborhood, it would be Gus. He came by after breakfast the next morning carrying a tape measure clipped to his belt and an expression so neutral it almost counted as affection. Nora explained the broad outline. Not the whole thing, just enough. Gus listened, then asked one question. Original door or replacement? Replacement, I said. Daniel redid the outbuilding after the fire year. Cheap men always cheap out on invisible hardware, Gus muttered. He took the property packet from Nora, studied the renovation permit references, and tapped one page. Sound dampening. Then he looked up. Why would a detached carriage room need sound dampening unless somebody wanted whatever happened in there to stay put? Neither of us answered. He did not need one. By noon he had sketched the old service window position from memory. By 1, Nora had confirmed the carriage permit included an interior partition, electrical modifications, and therapeutic environment stabilization features, which is the sort of phrase that sounds almost noble until you ask why it required an exterior switch override on the porch light. By 2:30 I had to leave the house because every object in it was suddenly accusing. I went to the Mercer Grand, walked the balcony, stood on the stage, looked up at the ghost light we kept center after rehearsal hours, the way Eleanor insisted we always should. The building had held weddings, funerals, labor fights, donor galas, emergency shelter cots after a winter storm, and once an entire high school orchestra that got stranded between towns by flooding and slept on the lobby rugs under emergency blankets. Buildings witness things. That is why I trust old ones more than polished men. On the edge of the stage, I found Bernadette arguing with a lighting vendor over peony placement. She saw my face and sent the vendor away with one lifted eyebrow. "Did you listen to the recorder?" "Yes, and you were right." "Of course I was." Then, because her edges only ever softened by permission, she added, "Do you need me tonight?" I looked at the ballroom under construction for the gala. White linen, silver runners, program stands, music rehearsal schedule on a clipboard near the house left entrance. Daniel wanted this room, wanted the applause, the signatures, the inheritance of tone. He wanted to step into the Mercer name under chandelier light and have the building itself appear to bless the transfer. Not yet, I thought. Not tonight. Not tonight, I said aloud. Bernadette studied me for one beat too long. "All right," she said, "but when it's time, tell me early. I prefer my justice properly staged." She meant it as wit, but she also meant it as skill. That afternoon, for the first time since the loading dock after the fire, I allowed myself to imagine something beyond rescue. I imagined reversal. Not screaming, not fists, not some vulgar scene in a driveway. Reversal. I wanted Daniel brought down by the same machinery he loved. Paper, timing, cue, audience, light. He had built a production out of my daughter's guilt and my grief. When it ended, I wanted the house lights all the way up. That night, Gus told us he could get one look inside the carriage house the next afternoon when Daniel took Lily to her private swim lesson and Beth rotated off before the evening nanny came on. 14 minutes of clean yard. Maybe 20 if traffic behaved. Nora said it was too risky. Gus said, "Every good rescue begins as something a lawyer hates." I did not disagree. The next afternoon smelled like cut grass and rain not yet committed to the sky. We parked behind the old birch line at 428, Gus with his tool roll, Nora with a folder and a phone she kept checking without appearing to, me with a pulse that felt louder than sound. I had imagined this part differently. Bravery has a vulgar imagination. It sees itself moving in clean lines, jaw set, purpose obvious. Real fear is quieter. It counts driveway seconds. It notices whether the gravel under your shoe sounds different on the left side of the path than the right. It resents leaves for existing. Beth's car was gone by 4:32. No sign of Daniel, no movement in the kitchen, the carriage lamp off, main house blinds half drawn. Gus crossed the yard first, low, quick, not theatrical. At the carriage door he crouched, studied the keypad and latch, then snorted softly. "Cheap," he whispered. 30 seconds later he had the service window unlatched from beneath the casing. Not the door. The window. Old theater men do not always open the obvious entry. They open the one a renovation contractor forgot to redesign because nobody pays enough attention to people who understand how sound and access actually work. Gus lifted the frame just enough. Nora slid inside first. That surprised me. Then again, Nora had probably spent 2 decades climbing into moral disasters through narrower openings than that. I followed her. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not filth, not neglect. Something worse, sterile detergent, old wood, medication, the faint metallic heat of electronics left on too long. And under it all, the ghost of something Eleanor once loved, piano polish. Someone had made the room comfortable on purpose. That made it obscene. The outer carriage room looked like a donor brochure for therapeutic refinement. Cream walls, soft rug, bookshelf, reading lamp, 2 upholstered chairs, a small table with fresh flowers changed recently enough that the petals still held shape. An upright piano against the far wall, not Eleanor's old Steinway, but the smaller Baldwin we had moved there years ago when the main instrument was restored for the grand. There were framed landscape prints, neutral throws, a tea tray, a basket with folded blankets. It was the kind of room designed to tell any accidental visitor that whatever happened there was gentle. Then the details corrected the lie. Exterior window latches, interior camera domes small enough to pass for smoke sensors if you did not know better. Medication lockbox keyed to the wall, a behavior chart tucked half under a journal stack. A shelf of Lily's drawings clipped with dates and comments like approved for Friday or hold until stable tone. A porch light circuit box inside the wall panel with manual override. A deadbolt on the inner partition door mounted on our side, not the person's side inside. There are rooms that hum with care. This room hummed with management. Nora picked up the nearest journal. Gus moved to the window hardware. I stood frozen in the middle of it, looking at the piano bench. There was sheet music on it, not complete scores. Fragments, single pages, practice lines, 1 yellow sticky note in Daniel's handwriting. No unresolved endings after light cue. I had to sit down, not because I was tired, because anger sometimes attacks the knees first. Nora opened the journal and read the page silently for 10 seconds, then handed it to me without a word. The entry was in Anna's handwriting. I knew it instantly, despite how much smaller it had become. When the porch switch blinks twice, I stop. Julian says stopping before completion builds tolerance for interrupted guilt. Daniel says Lily does better when my patterns stay predictable. Today I heard her laugh in the yard and wanted to answer through the vent. I did not. I'm trying not to make selfish choices. The date on the page was 6 weeks old. I turned it over. The next page. If I can keep my tone level through Friday, Daniel says I may hear Lily practice multiplication through the wall with the vent open. Julian says this is good because mothering from distance prevents unstable attachment claims later. Unstable attachment claims. It is one thing to suspect cruelty. It is another to watch it conjugate itself into policy. Behind me, Gus said very softly, "There's another room." The partition door, plain painted wood, brushed metal handle, deadbolt on our side. No reason at all for an inner door that locked only from the outside unless you were trying to produce the feeling of a studio while preserving the mechanics of a cell. I stepped toward it. Then from behind the door came the sound that will live in my body until I die. 4 quiet piano notes tapped out on the inside wall. Not random, deliberate. The same 4 notes Anna used to play when she was 7 and wanted Eleanor to come upstairs before she was technically done practicing. "Come hear this." My hand went to my mouth so fast it hurt my teeth. Nora looked at me sharply, then at the door. I knocked once. The notes stopped. Silence. Long enough to feel like something alive had pulled itself to stillness on the other side. Then my daughter's voice, thinner than memory, but unmistakably hers, asked, "Daniel?" For one breath, I could not answer. I had spent 4 years receiving descriptions of Anna, updates, assessments, temperature readings from a life translated by other people. Nothing in this world prepares a father for the first ordinary word he hears from a child he has already started grieving in a different tense. Nora spoke first. "No," she said, "it's not Daniel." Silence again. Then, careful and frightened at once, "Who is it?" I stepped closer to the door. "It's Dad." Nothing. Not because she had not heard, because belief has its own delay. "Anna," I said, and my voice broke on the second syllable. "It's me." Inside, something scraped, a chair maybe, or the side of the bed. Then she asked the question that split me open. "Did Julian send you?" No father should ever have to hear that question from his own child. "No one sent me. I came." Another silence. Then, very quietly, "You shouldn't be here if Daniel doesn't know." I put my hand on the deadbolt. "Then Daniel can learn new things today." "Wait," she said, suddenly sharp with fear. "Please, if you open it without telling me first, I'll panic." That sentence saved the moment. Or maybe saved me from ruining it. Nora stepped up beside me and said in the same tone she might use to explain jurisdiction to a nervous witness, "Anna, listen carefully. We are not here to force you. We are here because we found discharge records placing you at this address. Your father knows you were never in Nova Scotia after the first 5 months. We saw the porch cue. We saw Daniel take food in. We know Lily speaks to you through the vent. We are not guessing anymore." I heard Anna inhale, shallow, uneven. Then she said, "Lily told you. It was not a question." "Yes," I said. Another scrape. Then a long exhale, then so quietly I almost missed it. "Of course she did. She always hated their quiet rules." I opened the deadbolt slowly. The inner room was smaller than the outer one by half and contained twice the truth. Single bed, desk, wall shelf, narrow sink, high vent, 1 chair, no usable window that opened from her side. A smaller lamp fixed to the wall. More music pages, more journals, a child's drawing taped beside the bed, a camera dome in the corner, a ceiling speaker no bigger than a smoke detector, and Anna. She was sitting on the edge of the bed in a gray cardigan and dark leggings, one hand braced on the mattress like the room might tilt if she let go. People often say someone looked older than they should. That was not it. Anna looked edited, reduced, disciplined, smoothed by too much correction. Her hair was longer than she ever wore it by choice, tied back carelessly, not stylishly. Her face was thinner, not gaunt, but narrowed, the way prolonged vigilance can narrow a person. Her hands looked restless even when still, fingers pressing against each other like they had learned not to reach without permission. And yet she was unmistakably my daughter. The same gray eyes as Eleanor. The same left eyebrow that lifted first when she thought a person was lying. The same scar on her wrist from the year she tried to use stage combat tape as if it were ordinary household tape and lost the argument. She looked at me like I was either rescue or symptom. "Dad?" "Yes." She stood too fast and swayed. Nora moved instinctively. Anna flinched backward as if movement itself had been weaponized by repetition. We all froze. "Okay," Nora said. "No one's touching you." Anna's eyes moved from Nora to Gus to me, then to the open door, then back to me again. You look, she said and stopped. Older, I answered. She made the tiniest sound that might have been a laugh in another life. You always do that. Then her face collapsed. Oh God, you're really here. I took one step, then another. Slow enough to keep the room from breaking. When I reached her, I did not pull her into me. I let her choose. For 1 second, she stood there rigid as a set piece. Then she fell against my chest so hard I had to brace both feet to keep us upright. I have no language grand enough for what it is to hold your living child after years of absence you now know were manufactured. There was no speech, no insight, no healing, just her shaking against me and my hand on the back of her head, while the worst 4 years of my life rearranged themselves around the fact that she was warm. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her face quickly, almost guiltily. Daniel will know, she said. Yes. You shouldn't have come like this. I should have come years ago. She closed her eyes for a second. Then, without warning, she asked, Did Celia's family finally say they hated me? Nora and I looked at each other. That was the center. There it was. Not the room, not even Daniel. Guilt. I asked carefully, why would they? Anna stared at me. Because I killed her. No. Not I think, not I was told, not maybe. I killed her. Clean, installed, finished. Nora stepped closer to the desk and picked up another journal while I kept my eyes on Anna. Tell me what you think happened, I said. She sat back down on the edge of the bed, like her legs had lost instructions. It was the preview, she said, at the annex. The east loft was already running hot. Celia said delay the practicals. I said no because the trustees were downstairs and Daniel kept saying if we looked disorganized, we'd lose the air rights leverage and the preservation package. We fought. She went back up. Then the wiring sparked. Anna pressed her fingertips into her temples. I remember smoke, Daniel yelling, Julian saying I was in shock. Then later he said Celia didn't get out. He said the statements already put the sequence on me. He said with the medication I was on and the pressure I'd been under, nobody would believe it was an accident. He said if I wanted Lily to have a mother someday instead of a headline, I had to disappear until the legal risk cooled. Her voice stayed level while she said all that. Too level. Like it had been rehearsed into muscle. What legal risk? Nora asked. Anna blinked at her. Manslaughter, negligent homicide, civil exposure, child endangerment because Lily was on the property that day. Julian said when women break under pressure, courts call it unpredictability and children pay for it. Julian said. Daniel said, they said. People do not survive years of controlled captivity by talking in first conclusions. They talk in borrowed ones. I crouched so I would not be towering over her. Anna, have you ever seen Celia's death certificate? No. Burial notice? No. Police finding? No. Anything with your own eyes proving she died in that loft? She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Nora, then back at me. I saw blood, she said quietly. Where? On the stairs, on Celia's scarf, on my sleeve. Nora asked, Did you see a body? Anna's eyes changed, not understanding, not yet, but the first insult to certainty. No, she whispered. There it was, the smallest crack in the wall. From the yard outside came the faint slam of a car door. All four of us stopped moving. Gus crossed to the outer room window and checked the drive through the side gap. Not him, he said after 3 seconds. Courier, wrong house. We all breathed again. Only then did I realize how little air we had each been using. Anna looked toward the outer room, then back at the open partition. Did Lily really tell you? Yes, her face twisted. They use her because it works, she said. Every time I stopped arguing, every time I rewrote what Julian called the truth journals, every time I accepted the light cues without a scene, they let me hear her longer. She swallowed. At first it was calls, then that got harder to control. Then it was the vent, then drawings under the piano lid, then the promise that if I kept my tone regulated, I could listen while she did homework in the yard. Tone regulated. I looked around the room again. At the journals, at the vent, at the fixed lamp, at the way the chair had been positioned so the camera saw her face directly when seated. Everything in the room had been designed to turn suffering into compliance. Anna, I said, I need you to listen to me very carefully. She nodded, but fear had started returning to her shoulders now that the first recognition was done. I heard Daniel yesterday at the Grand. He said Celia is alive. Her whole body went still. Not dramatic stillness. Not shock from a movie. The awful exact stillness of a mind receiving information it has no place to store without destroying the shelf it came on. No, she said. Yes, no. Nora found no death certificate, no estate file, no final fatality trail. Daniel said the words himself. Celia is alive. Anna looked at the open door, then at me, then at the journal on the desk, as if one of those objects might step forward and decide reality for her. Finally, she whispered, If that's true, then what have I been doing in here? There are questions a father should answer with certainty. That was not one of them. So I told her the only clean truth I had, surviving a lie someone profitable built around you. She started crying then. Not loudly, not prettily, the exhausted kind, the kind that sounds like a body finally spending pain it could not risk showing earlier. I sat beside her on the bed. For a while, none of us spoke. Then Anna wiped her face with the heel of her hand and asked, "Do you have proof?" "Yes." "Bring it next time. Next time. Not come back and save me. Not take me now. Bring proof." That was when I knew how deep Daniel and Julian had gone. My daughter did not need rescue first. She needed reality. We had already stayed too long. Nora knew it. Gus knew it. I knew it. Daniel could come home early. Beth could double back. A neighbor could notice. One unexpected variable, and the whole structure would shift before we had enough to hold it in court. I stood reluctantly. "When can I come back?" Anna looked at the open partition door like it might answer for her. Then she said, "Not tomorrow. Julian comes on Thursdays. Friday afternoon Lily has swim and Daniel stays at the theater till 6 if the gala schedule holds." That sentence did two things at once. It gave us a window, and it proved how completely my daughter had been forced to organize her life around the timetables of the people controlling it. Before I left, I turned to her and asked one more thing. "Does Lily know you're her mother?" Anna closed her eyes. "Yes," she said, "but only in the ways they can still supervise." I climbed back out the service window, feeling like a burglar in my own bloodline. Across the yard, the birch leaves moved in the wind like applause heard through walls. I hated the prettiness of it, hated how ordinary the property looked, hated how capable evil is of choosing neutral paint. In the truck, Nora shut the door and let out one long breath through her nose. "Well," she said. I gripped the wheel. "No." She looked at me. "Well is not the word," I said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." On the drive back, no one spoke for 6 miles. Then Nora said, "We do not call this a wellness arrangement ever again." "What do we call it?" She looked out the window. "A privately administered coercive confinement system with financial motive." Useful people always name monsters properly once they see them in daylight. Back at my kitchen table, the room from the carriage house came with us in pieces. A copied journal page, a photo Gus took of the porch override box, a picture of the medication lock, a shot of the behavior notes clipped near the piano, a close image of the sticky note in Daniel's handwriting telling Anna not to leave unresolved endings after light cue. And one more thing Nora took from the desk, a folded therapy instruction sheet signed by Julian Reddick. Patient remains highly responsive to guilt sequencing, maternal deprivation cues, and child-linked regulation incentives. Maintain environmental predictability. If paternal contact becomes intrusive, increase burden language and remind patient that external involvement risks custody review. Burden language. There it was again. Everything Daniel had said behind the gala curtain already existed in written form. Not as spontaneous cruelty, as method. That mattered more than shock. It meant premeditation. Sustained system. Profit over time. I did not sleep that night. At 3 a.m, I stood in Eleanor's old music room and looked at the empty wall where the Baldwin had hung in family photos before we moved it to the carriage house years earlier. The room smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Her metronome still sat on the window shelf. Stopped forever at a number I never changed because I am exactly sentimental enough to keep the wrong objects untouched. I said her name out loud, not because I thought dead wives answer, because some nights grief and report are the same thing. "Eleanor," I said, "I missed it." The room did not forgive me. It did not accuse me either. It just remained a room. By morning I had stopped wanting only rescue. Now I wanted sequence, proof, exposure. And after that, consequence arranged so precisely, Daniel would understand at last what it felt like to have light used against him. The first clean proof that Celia Hart was alive came from a community arts newsletter no one with dignity should ever have had to read. Nora found it 2 days later at 11:17 in the morning, after 3 hours of searching, incorporation records, licensing directories, preserved event pages, and the sort of local digital debris people forget the internet never entirely discards. The newsletter belonged to a boutique coastal hotel in Savannah that hosted chamber recitals, cooking weekends, and wellness retreats for people with too much linen and not enough inner life. The article itself was harmless, a summer fundraiser, 3 photos, bad font, too much gratitude. In the second photo, third from the right, holding a tray of programs and laughing at something off camera, stood Celia Hart. Not a look-alike, not maybe. Celia, hair shorter, color darker, but the same narrow jaw, the same slight left shoulder drop she developed after a rigging pulley clipped her years earlier in Toledo. The same scar at the base of her thumb from a staple gun accident during the Rosen renovation. Alive, smiling, working a fundraiser while my daughter sat in a locked-out building, believing she had killed her. I sat so hard my chair hit the cabinet. Nora turned the screen toward me without speaking. There are truths that arrive like storms. That one arrived like accounting. No doubt, no weather, just a column finally balancing after years of fraud. She's alive, I said. Yes. She's been alive. Yes. How long? Nora clicked again. Linked event pages, archive staff bios, a dissolved LLC filing, a donor list from a private arts retreat, a business registration for Hard Event Strategies LLC linked to a forwarding service in Delaware, and more interestingly, an administrative mailing address that matched a management suite once used by Julian Reddick's practice billing group. There it was, not the whole conspiracy, but enough of its stitching to see the pattern. Celia and Julian had overlapping administrative traces 2 years after the fire. Daniel had approved consulting payments during the same window, and 3 months after one of my quarterly transfers marked extended residential stabilization, a condo in Charleston had been purchased through a holding company Nora tied, after one furious hour and a favor from a title clerk, to Daniel Cross. I drove to Charleston that evening with Nora because once a lie takes human shape again, distance becomes offensive. The condo complex sat 5 blocks off the water in a clean beige development built for people who liked the idea of taste more than the labor behind it. Unit 4C, second floor, balcony ferns, white curtains, the sort of place nobody notices because it has spent a fortune becoming visually forgettable. We parked across the street in a bakery lot after closing. At 7:14, Celia stepped onto the balcony with a wine glass and her phone. At 7:27, Daniel arrived. He did not look around, did not hesitate, did not text from the curb. He went in with the kind of ownership that only exists when routine has replaced risk. The lights in the living room shifted warmer, shadows crossed the curtains. At 8:03, they appeared on the balcony together, close, talking, then laughing, then kissing with the ugly practical confidence of people who have already decided consequences are for other families. I turned my face away first, not because it hurt my pride, because for one stupid second, all I could think about was Anna stopping at a blinking porch light while the woman she thought she killed laughed into the same coastal air Daniel reserved for himself. Nora did not offer comfort. Again, useful people know when comfort would insult the facts. Instead, she took 3 photos with a long lens and said, "Good. Now they exist where courts can find them." Back home, we laid everything beside the carriage house evidence and started building a timeline. Fire, shock, Julian inserted, Anna removed, Celia disappears. Insurance closes without fatality clarity, but enough internal hush to avoid scrutiny. Nova Scotia for 5 months, residential transfer to Mercer Lane Annex, quarterly payments from me, consulting disbursements from Daniel, administrative overlap between Julian's billing group and Celia's shell, condo purchase, developer negotiations accelerate, proxy draft prepared, capacity draft prepared, Gala scheduled, sale window identified. What had seemed like cruelty in isolated scenes resolved into architecture. That changed my anger, refined it, less heat, more edges. The next time I went to the carriage house, I brought photographs. Celia on the balcony, Daniel arriving, the condo deed abstract, the newsletter image, a close crop of Celia's left hand, where the staple gun scar still showed if you knew where to look. Anna let me in faster this time. That by itself was a kind of tragedy. How quickly a person in captivity calibrates hope to small repetitions. She had braided her hair. The room smelled faintly of tea and paper. Someone had left an orange on the desk untouched long enough for one side to dry. I laid the photos out one by one on the piano bench because the desk felt too much like Julian's territory. At first she only looked, then really looked. Her fingers hovered above the balcony shot without touching it. "That's not current," she said. "It is." "No." I slid the property abstract under it, then the newsletter image, then the hand crop. She stared at the scar. "She got that during strike week in Toledo," Anna whispered. Then her face changed. Not recognition exactly. Correction. Like memory had just caught somebody repainting over it and objected. "She hated white wine," Anna said suddenly. "What?" "She always drank gin when she wanted to seem brave and tea when she actually wasn't." Her eyes stayed on the balcony photo. "That's not a party smile. That's a rehearsed smile." Celia never smiled with both corners when she meant it. There it was, the first memory not fed by Daniel or Julian. The first small fact arriving from Anna herself instead of their script. I sat beside her on the bench. "She's alive." Anna nodded once, then shook her head, then laughed without sound. "If she's alive," she said, Then either I lost my mind inside the wrong story, or they built the story around losing my mind. Maybe both for a while, I said, but one of those is criminal. She pressed both hands flat to the piano lid. I need to tell you what I remember before they told me what to remember. That sentence mattered more than the photos, because that was the real recovery point. Not feeling better, not even believing me, separating memory from instruction. So she started with the fire night again. This time she went slower, and because the certainty had cracked, details moved differently. Celia had not been trying to delay the practicals, not exactly. She had been arguing with Daniel backstage before the preview even started. Anna overheard only part of it because she was halfway up the loft stairs chasing a cue-book discrepancy, and Julian, who should never have been in a working rehearsal zone in the first place, had already given her something for the panic spikes she'd been having that month. That mattered. Medication before the incident, Julian inside the event. Daniel and Celia arguing. What were they arguing about, I asked. Anna closed her eyes. Money, something about percentages, and an old donation list. Celia said she wanted it cleaned before guests saw the East office. Daniel told her to stop panicking and follow the plan. Her eyes opened. At the time, I thought they meant Gala logistics. Now I don't. Neither did I. Then she remembered one more thing. The sprinklers had failed in the East corridor before the fire grew. Not after, before. She had noticed because the air felt too hot and dry near the loft door. Celia had laughed and said, "Your husband's precious insurance rider better be worth this." Insurance rider. There it was. The old world starting to push back. Money and infrastructure. The things people say when they do not think a sedated, exhausted daughter will later be forced to build a prison out of them. And the blood, I asked carefully. Anna's fingers tightened on the piano edge. It was on Celia's scarf. Not everywhere. One side. Bright, too bright. She swallowed. Julian kept saying, "Do not look, do not fixate, stay with my voice." Daniel kept telling me Lily needed me alive, not public. I remember trying to go back inside. Daniel stopped me. Then later, Julian said there had been a body, and I was lucky they got ahead of it. Lucky. Always lucky. Amazing how often predators describe captivity as mercy. When I left that day, Anna stopped me at the outer room window and said, "If you come back again, come with somebody who knows fire." That was how Leon Baines entered the story. Retired fire marshal. Broad man. Sun-damaged face. 3 divorces. Absolute contempt for theatrical narratives built on bad burn patterns. Leon had led county arson investigations for 19 years and hated almost everyone who used the words freak accident before the soot had cooled. He had looked at the annex file once, years earlier, but Daniel and the board insurer pressured for a narrow technical closure, and because no body was officially tied to the site in recoverable terms and the damage remained partial rather than catastrophic, the case died in the swampy territory between negligence, private settlement, and institutional embarrassment. When Nora and I walked into his workshop with the new timeline, he read for 15 minutes and said, "Well, either your son-in-law is the unluckiest efficient man in Pennsylvania, or somebody curated that fire." He spent 2 days repulling everything he could: suppression maps, service logs, power records, maintenance orders, vendor lists, scene photos, insurance extracts, electrical inspection notes. Then he came to my house with a cardboard box, spread burn photos across my dining table, and tapped the same spot in 6 of them. "The origin pattern in the loft doesn't match the story your daughter was fed. What does it match?" He looked at the photos again. Preparation. He walked us through it slowly. The fire's early heat path suggested accelerant or deliberately compromised insulation near the lighting relay housing. The suppression delay in the East corridor had been created by manual valve closure, not system failure. The emergency side door alarm had been disabled earlier that evening. And perhaps most damning, Celia's supposed re-entry route made no logistical sense because the cue books she was said to be rescuing had already been moved downstairs before guests arrived. "You're saying she was never trapped up there?" "I'm saying if she was, it wasn't for the reason anybody told your daughter." Leon tapped another photo. "And if I were writing this cold, with no loyalty to your family and no appetite for drama, I'd say somebody planned a contained scare, expected insurance leverage, and either misjudged spread or used the chaos for a second objective." "A second objective," Nora repeated. Leon looked at me. "Your daughter." The room went silent. He was right. Of course he was right. The fire had not just been money, it had been opportunity. Enough chaos to create guilt, enough smoke to swallow sequence, enough institutional pressure to make a clean public account undesirable, enough room for Daniel and Julian to get to Anna before truth did. When I took Leon's findings to the carriage house, Anna read the annotated diagrams so carefully I thought she might cut herself on them. At the note about the manual valve closure, she sat back and said, "Daniel told me systems failed because old buildings punish romantic people." That was one of his favorite kinds of sentences. Cynicism dressed as wisdom. A way to make the victim feel childish for wanting the world to have simpler villains. Did anyone besides Daniel and Celia have access to those valves? Leon asked her later in the neutral county room when we brought him in quietly for a short consultation. Anna thought a long time, then said, "Celia did, Daniel did, the facility's lead did, but he was in the lobby with donors. I remember because he was complaining about the floral budget, and Julian should not have known where any of it was." She paused. "But he was backstage early. Why?" "I thought because of me." Leon's face did not change, but his voice did, just a little. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe because you were never the only moving part that night." Anna absorbed that sentence the way people absorb medicine they do not yet know whether to trust. Then she asked the question none of us had wanted to ask first. "If they did this," she said, "why keep me alive in there? Why not make me disappear properly?" Nora answered before I could. "Because a dead daughter complicates inheritance and invites sympathy. A hidden living daughter in clinical fog can still sign." Anna looked down at her own hands, then at the old trust amendment copy Nora had finally shown her, the one Daniel meant to get executed at Gala night. "Sign what?" "Control," I said. The next hour was the ugliest clean hour of my life. Nora laid it all out. Daniel had been negotiating a sale package with Oak Ridge Development for 14 months. Not just a partial rights lease, a full restructuring around the Mercer Grand, the Rosen Annex, and 2 adjoining preservation parcels Eleanor had protected through brutal donor fights before she died. On paper, it was a sophisticated redevelopment partnership. In practice, it was a slow-motion cannibalism of the district wrapped in cultural language. He needed Anna's voting trust position because Eleanor had structured the family holdings years earlier so that artistic assets and public trust properties could not be sold on finance votes alone. Anna held the controlling family block once she came of age and retained capacity. I held board authority and trustee weight. Together we could stop him. Separately, with Anna clinically absent and me emotionally managed, Daniel could work around almost anything. He had spent 4 years doing exactly that. "That's why the quarterly numbers never stopped," Nora said. "You weren't paying for care. You were paying to keep the mechanism lubricated until the real money was ready." Anna sat absolutely still, then asked, in a voice so quiet I nearly missed it, "How much?" I told her. My transfers alone totaled $288,000. The insurance redirections and consulting shells Leon and Dennis, Nora's accountant contact, had started tracing suggested another $1.4 million in diversions. The Charleston condo, Celia's contracts, Julian's billing overlays, legal drafts, suppression maintenance fabricated after the fact. By the time Daniel planned to move the district package, the total personal upside could exceed $8 million, even before developer bonuses. Anna listened without expression. Then she looked at the carriage house walls and said, "I thought the room was the punishment. It was payroll." That line made Nora cry. She hid it by turning away to adjust her glasses. But I saw it. I see now that the most devastating truths were rarely the loud ones. Not the arrest language, not the money, not even Celia alive. It was the moments when my daughter named the room correctly. Payroll. Not healing, not containment. Payroll. That was when the story changed again. Until then, we had been rescuing Anna and exposing Daniel. After that, we were preparing a case. And cases require something pain hates: discipline. Detective Rowan Price introduced himself by refusing to sit down. That alone made me like him. Middle-aged, lean, hair going silver at the temples, but not enough to soften him. He had the look of a man who had learned to conserve every unnecessary movement because the useful ones always came with paperwork after them. Nora brought him in through a county contact and an old fraud case involving a museum board that thought missing endowment funds were a philosophical issue instead of a crime. We met in an interview room the county used for witness preparation and occasionally mediation when people still believed they might remain family afterward. Price listened to the full story once. No interruptions. No sympathy performance. No theatrical outrage. Then he asked 3 questions. Do we have proof the supposed dead woman is alive? Yes. Do we have proof the daughter was transferred from legitimate treatment to residential confinement at the husband's property? Yes. Will the daughter speak, and more importantly, will she withstand direct contact long enough to let them explain themselves? That one we could not answer right away. Price noticed. Of course he did. He looked down at the copies of Anna's journals, the porch cue notes, the child-linked reward sheets, and the trust amendment package. Then he said, "If we move too early, this becomes eccentric private care with ugly boundaries and a bad husband. If we move correctly, this becomes coercive confinement, fraud, exploitation, suppression of investigative evidence, and likely conspiracy tied to the original fire." Nora folded her hands. So we need them talking, on purpose, in their own words, about motive, method, and why she stayed there. I thought of the carriage house, of the vent, of Lily's drawings clipped like rations. You want Anna to go back in there and bait them. Price met my eyes. I want Anna to decide whether she's ready to help us make them say what they think is still unassailable. The next sentence mattered more. And if she isn't, he said, we build slower. But if she is, the Gala may become useful. That was the first time someone outside my own anger said it. Useful. Daniel wanted the Gala because it gave him timing, optics, trustees, signatures, and emotional noise dense enough to hide coercion. Price wanted it because public events make liars overconfident. The larger the performance, the more certain they become that everyone else is still watching the stage they built. When we explained the idea to Anna, she sat in the county interview room with both hands wrapped around a paper cup and stared at the scuffed floor for a long time before answering. I don't know how to talk to them anymore without becoming the version they built. Nobody in that room corrected her, because nobody there knew enough yet to promise they could. Elise Monroe arrived 20 minutes later, assistant district attorney, 42, sharp-featured, voice like a clean blade. She specialized in coercive control, medical exploitation, and elder trust crimes, which sounded to me like three separate dark worlds until she started laying them over the paperwork and made me realize Daniel had been borrowing tools from all of them. She read Anna's journal pages in silence. Then she set them down and said, "Juries understand locks. We have a lock. Good. But the harder truth here is that the real bars are guilt, child access, and money. We need them named by the people who built them. Otherwise, the defense says this was weird therapeutic care with consensual family boundaries." Anna gave a small bitter laugh. Therapeutic care. Elise did not smile. I know. But courtrooms are full of professionally ironed liars. We plan for them, not for ourselves. Then she turned to Anna. If you do this, we do not ask for performance. We ask for stillness. Let them rush to explain. Let them think you only know enough to be frightened. People like Daniel and Julian do not tolerate unscripted calm. They fill silence with control, and control recorded clearly becomes evidence. That became the spine of the next 4 days. Training. I had pictured strategy before in a cinematic way, because I am apparently an idiot in some deep masculine region of imagination. What it actually looked like was fluorescent rooms, plastic chairs, bottled water, transcripts, audio levels, and my daughter learning how not to apologize on cue. The first rehearsal nearly broke all of us. Elise played Julian first. She softened her voice, lowered her shoulders, and said, "Anna, what you're feeling right now is emotional activation, not clarity. Let's not mistake distress for insight." I watched old training hit my daughter like cold water. Her eyes dropped instantly, shoulders in, breath shallow, one hand already moving toward the position she used in the journals when she wrote compliance reflections. "I know," she said automatically. "I'm trying to regulate." Elise stopped at once. "No." Anna blinked up, ashamed immediately, which was the worst part. "No," Elise said again, gentler this time. "That is the script. We do not fight the script by hating yourself for knowing it. We fight it by hearing the actual accusation underneath." Price, leaning against the wall, asked, "What is he really saying when he says that?" Anna rubbed both hands against the paper cup. "That my understanding doesn't count unless he approves it." "Good," Elise said. "Now answer that, not his sentence." They ran it again. "You are mistaking distress for insight." Anna swallowed, looked at the table. Then finally said, "No, I am separating your language from what you did to me." It sounded thin, borrowed, like she was trying on somebody else's coat, but it existed. That mattered. The second rehearsal was Daniel. Price played him because he had the right mix of patience and contempt. "Anna," he said, "I need you to stop spiraling and be useful." Her flinch this time was smaller, but still there. He repeated it almost kindly. "I need you useful." Anna closed her eyes, took one breath, then answered, "Useful to who?" Price's head lifted slightly, just enough to mark improvement. "Again," Elise said. By the fourth repetition, the line sounded like hers. "Useful to who?" Small sentence, huge doorway. That was what the training really was. Not speeches, doorways. One phrase at a time, we were building her exits out of theirs. Nick Patel handled the technical side, young, dry, and almost offensively calm around covert equipment. He set tiny recorders on the table like a surgeon laying out tools and explained line of sight, fabric noise, skin contact, and backup capture routes in a tone that made hidden microphones sound like responsible kitchenware. Body mic under collar seam, secondary unit in camisole hem, ambient capture from the outer carriage room if we could place one in advance, live monitoring from the county vehicle, signal integrity checks before entry, code phrase for immediate move. Code phrase selection took longer than anyone expected. It had to sound natural, not theatrical, not something she would say by accident. And it had to tie to the pressure point most likely to turn real danger into legal necessity. At first, Price suggested something neutral. Elise hated it. Nora suggested using Lily's name in a sentence because every pressure route in that house eventually ran through Lily. We tried several. I miss Lily. Too ordinary. I need to see Lily. Possible too early. Please don't use Lily. Too formal. Then Anna, who had been quiet for 10 minutes, looked at the table and said, "What about this?" She lifted her eyes and spoke it slowly. "If you cared about Lily, you would stop." The room went silent. Natural. Possible in context. Sharp enough to mean rupture. Specific enough not to slip out by accident. Price nodded once. "That's it." Nick recorded her saying it 3 times, checked the waveform, adjusted levels, then said with the detached satisfaction of a competent man who lives mostly through signal clarity, "Good." The line cuts. The hardest session happened on the 3rd day. Elise, this time as Daniel said, "If you blow this up now, Lily is the one who loses everything." Anna physically stopped breathing. I stood so fast the chair went over backward. Price put one hand up without looking at me. "Don't." Every instinct in me wanted to cross the room, to fix, to undo, to put my body between that sentence and its target. But Elise was right to keep going. She leaned forward, voice suddenly stripped of theater. "Anna, look at me. What room are you in?" No answer. "Anna, what room are you in?" "County interview," she whispered. "Who controls the door?" "You do." "Who decides whether you see Lily today?" Silence. Then, hoarse, "No one in this room." Again, "No one in this room." Again. By the 3rd time, air returned to her. I went out to the parking lot after that and sat in my truck with both hands over my face because I could still hear how quickly one sentence from the old system could reach into her lungs and take over. Nora came out 5 minutes later and stood beside the driver's side window until I rolled it down. "Are you done being a father in the least strategically useful way possible?" she asked. "No." "Good, because we still need you." That was how she comforted. By insulting collapse until it stood back up. By the 4th day, Anna could do something that would have sounded trivial to anyone who had not lived through the first 3. She could stay still while someone tried to interpret her feelings for her. That was the skill. Not wit, not even courage in the loud sense. Stillness. When Price and Daniel's voice said, "You should be grateful, I kept you safe," Anna looked straight at him and answered, "Safe people do not need light cues." Price did not say anything for 2 full seconds. Then Elise wrote the line down. "Keep that." More evidence arrived while we trained. Dennis Greer, Nora's accountant, built the financial picture into something courts could digest without losing the nausea. The quarterly payments from me had been routed through a care management entity Julian helped administer. From there, substantial chunks moved into consulting shells Daniel controlled. Some went to the Charleston condo. Some to legal drafts, some to a private line item labeled residential continuity support. Some to Celia under consultant retainers for event recovery and heritage assessment work she never actually performed for any Mercer property. Insurance money from the fire had also flowed oddly, not enough to announce fraud by itself, more than enough to suggest curated invoices, inflated remediation billing, and off-book movement after the board stopped asking hard questions because the building reopened and no one wanted the anniversary tainted forever by unresolved fire talk. Then Dennis found the document that turned motive into something far uglier. A durable proxy framework for Anna, not executed, prepared. Not full guardianship, not yet. Something more tactical. Financial delegation during periods of instability. Property consent authority. Vote transfer rights on preservation parcels if the signer remained in structured private care. Contingency language tied to parental stability narratives in the event of public relapse. They had been preparing to harvest her legal identity one signature at a time. When Anna read it, she did not cry. She did not rage. She just sat in the interview room and said, "He was never waiting for me to get better." "No," Elise said. Anna looked up. "He was waiting for me to become easy." That line went into the case notes too. The night before Gala Day, we ran the full sequence. Anna enters the carriage house as usual after a late afternoon transport from the county safe location. Daniel thinks she has returned from a discreet prep appointment for her private donor reintroduction. Julian arrives to steady her and coach. Miriam is nearby with signature folders. Daniel wants the proxies, trust amendments, and board support letter handled before 7:30 so Gala momentum can carry the rest. Anna starts with doubt, not accusation. I've been thinking. I need the truth. I saw things I can't explain. Was Celia really dead? Why does Charleston matter? Why did the documents say proxy? Why did the room need a porch cue? Was I ever actually dangerous to Lily? What exactly was the money for? Then stillness. Let them speak. Let them justify. Let them reach for management. If physical danger begins, if someone searches her clothes, if the room shifts too hard, she uses the line. If you cared about Lily, you would stop. We rehearsed it until the walls themselves could have testified. That night, back in my kitchen, Anna drank coffee at my table for the first time in 4 years. Real coffee. Too strong because I make it badly when nervous. She held the mug with both hands and looked around the room like an archivist studying a place she once lived in but no longer fully trusted. The house had changed. Of course it had. Furniture moved. Eleanor's chair reupholstered after the cat that died 2 years earlier shredded it on principle. A new lamp in the hallway. 2 fewer people at the table. 1 more set of printed case notes under the fruit bowl than any decent family should own. I used to think this kitchen sounded louder, Anna said. It used to, I answered. Your mother hated quiet meals. She considered them a failure of seasoning. Anna smiled, briefly. Then the smile went. Would she have seen this sooner? The question had waited there for days. I knew it would come eventually. Yes, I said. She nodded, not wounded, just confirming a painful old faith. She always knew how to hear the wrong note first. Yes. Anna looked into the coffee. I don't know what I am if I'm not the version they built. That was the most frightened thing she said all week. Not about Daniel, not about prison, not about the Gala, identity. The trap had not only stolen time, it had colonized authorship. Who gets to say what your fear means? Who gets to narrate your worst hour? Who gets to decide whether survival counts as weakness or evidence? I answered carefully, because anything softer would have felt like propaganda. You're my daughter, I said. You're Lily's mother. You're a woman who lived inside a lie longer than anyone should and still kept enough of herself to ask the right question when proof finally arrived. The rest we build again. She looked up at me for a long moment, then said, almost like a child checking whether gravity still intended to work, You really believe that? Yes. That night she slept in Eleanor's old music room because every other guest room felt too sealed. I slept in the chair outside the door, which would have embarrassed both of us in any normal week and comforted me more than I will admit out loud until I am dead. At 3:12 in the morning, I heard her get up and move quietly across the room. A pause, then 4 piano notes from the little practice keyboard Eleanor kept by the bookshelf. Come hear this. I did not open the door. Some reunions are held together by not rushing the second half. Gala day began with rain. Not hard, not dramatic. A fine disciplined mist that made the city look sharpened rather than sad. The Mercer Grand always wore weather well. Its sandstone darkened. The carved masks over the entrance deepened at the eyes. The brass doors held water like old money holds secrets. By 10 in the morning, production trucks were already lined up at the curb. Waitstaff were moving under umbrellas. And Bernadette Russo was inside the ballroom personally rearranging centerpieces because, as she informed a volunteer in a tone that should have been illegal, grief is not a palette and neither is developer money. Daniel wanted the evening divided into 3 emotional acts. Act 1, Donor Nostalgia, a short film about Eleanor and the Restoration years. Act 2, Resilience, a carefully crafted update about Anna's supposed progress and the family's devotion to healing. Act 3, Vision, the redevelopment partnership, positioned not as sale but stewardship, new arts housing, revenue stabilization, modernized legacy. Every euphemism available to a man trying to sell old bones while claiming to honor them. He had built the schedule beautifully. That was what made the revenge so satisfying. The better the staging, the more glorious the collapse. Price moved plainclothes officers into the building by noon. House staff badges for 2. Lighting crew blacks for 3. Valet overflow for another. One couple dressed like donors with just enough irritation to be believable. Nick in the audio booth, where he could route the live feed if necessary. Elise in a back office with warrant packets, charging outlines, and the kind of composure prosecutors wear when they are preparing to ruin polite people in public. Nora drifting between prep rooms as if she were just another exhausted attorney managing family logistics on a high-stakes donor night. Gus did what only old stage men can do without attracting attention. He prepped the building itself. A clean monitor line from the side dressing suite, access to the old comm channel, a hidden patch from the rehearsal room mic bank to the control booth in case Nick needed secondary routing. Gus called it giving the house a conscience. At 2, Bernadette intercepted me outside the ballroom and adjusted my tie without asking. "You look like a man about to bury someone with an invoice," she said. "Is that bad?" "It depends whether the invoice itemizes properly." Then she lowered her voice. "Your daughter is in the blue dressing corridor." She looked at the lilies and said they smelled like the room behind her childhood piano. So I removed the lilies. I stared at her. Bernadette looked mildly offended. "What? You thought revenge meant I would ignore flowers? Useful people bring their own weapons." Anna spent the afternoon in the family suite under Price's quiet supervision, not locked, not hovered over, just held inside a schedule for once that she had actually consented to. Hair done simply, black gown instead of ivory or silver because she said she was tired of being dressed like recovery. No dramatic makeup. No attempt to make her look fragile for donors or miraculous for trustees, just Anna, tired, steady, present. When I saw her at 4:30, she was standing by the window looking down at the rainy alley behind the Grand. For a second I saw my daughter at 22 again, before the board learned her name and before grief taught her body to apologize for taking up room. Then she turned, and the years between us stayed in the room with us like unwelcome witnesses. "How do I look?" she asked. "Like yourself," I said. "That's terrifying." "I know." She smiled briefly. Then, after a pause, "If he notices, he may, and if I start hearing his version louder than mine." "Elise says stay with facts." Anna nodded. "Facts." We went over them once more. Not all, only the anchors. Celia alive, fire manipulated, no death certificate, no legal finding, condo, proxy draft, quarterly payments, light cues, Lily, stillness, code phrase. At 5:15, Daniel texted, "Bring Anna to the side suite at 6. Julian needs 15 minutes with her before donor walkthrough. Need her calm and brief. No improvising, no improvising." That text made Price grin for the first time all week. "Good," he said. "He's already directing. That makes people sloppy." The body wire sat flat beneath Anna's collar seam. Secondary recorder at the hem. Mic test clean. Nick spoke through the monitor line. "Say something ordinary." Anna looked toward the mirror and said, "I hate microphones." Nick answered, "Good, they love you anyway." At 5:58, Price gave final instructions. "Do not chase confession. Chase explanation. Let him tell you what he thinks is reasonable. Those are the admissions. Daniel wants efficiency. Julian wants professional superiority. Miriam wants deniability. Give each of them a question that threatens the thing they value. Then be quiet." Anna repeated the code phrase once. "If you cared about Lily, you would stop. No shake, no drift, clean line." Then she looked at me and asked the question I had dreaded all day. "If they say I helped, if they say I stayed because some part of me wanted the room, what then?" I answered before anyone with better language could intervene. "Then they'll be lying in public and we will answer in daylight." She held my gaze for 3 seconds, then nodded. At 6 o'clock exactly, Nora escorted her down the blue dressing corridor and into the side suite Daniel had reserved for family recalibration before the resilience segment. Daniel loved rooms with names like that. Any space becomes easier to weaponize once you call it a process. From the monitoring van parked under delivery awning cover, we heard the suite door close. Fabric movement, a chair, Daniel's footsteps, then his voice, warm and controlled as ever. "There you are. You look beautiful." Anna answered without softness. "I'm not here for beautiful." Small silence. "Good." Daniel recovered immediately. "I know today is big. That's why we keep it simple. Short donor thanks, no emotional overreach. We get through the room, then the 3 of us sit with Miriam and finalize the trust housekeeping." Trust housekeeping. Price scribbled the phrase down on the yellow pad balanced against his knee. Anna asked, "Why does housekeeping need proxies?" Another silence. This one longer. Daniel chuckled like a teacher indulging a difficult child. "Because boards need continuity and you've been out of circulation. We talked about this." "No," Anna said. "You talked," I nodded. Beside me in the van, Elise did not move, but I saw the corner of her mouth tighten once. Approval. Daniel shifted. We could hear it in the mic. "Anna, if today is going to work, I need your tone on my side." There it was. Tone. The old leash. Anna answered evenly. "Whose side is that?" He laughed again. Thinner now. "Mine, yours, Lily's, the family's. Please don't start fracturing language tonight." Fracturing language. God, I hated him. Before Anna could respond, a second set of footsteps entered the suite. Julian, he did not greet first, he assessed. "How elevated is she?" Not "how are you?" Not Anna. "How elevated is she?" Daniel answered, questioning but coherent. Questioning but coherent. My daughter reduced to a briefing point in a room built for her own staged reappearance. Julian sat down. We heard the chair. Anna, he said in that low clinical voice I now knew was just another type of vanity. Before we move forward, I need to check whether this is fear or destabilization. Anna took one audible breath, then gave him her first real knife. What did you bill my father for when you moved me from Nova Scotia to the carriage house? The silence that followed was so sharp I could almost see the room. Julian did not answer immediately. He recalibrated. That was what predators of his type do. Not lie first, reclassify. What exactly have you been reading? Enough. Enough for what? Enough to know you never intended release. A faint rustle, paper maybe. Daniel moving toward her. That isn't true, he said quickly. Anna, you're upset and mixing timelines. Anna stayed where she was. Was Celia dead? Julian said. We need precision. Wrong answer. Elise wrote something on the pad so hard the pen almost tore through. Anna stayed with facts. Was Celia dead? Daniel cut in, faster this time. Why would you ask that now? Because I saw her in Charleston. There it was. No way back from that sentence. Inside the suite, someone stood so abruptly the chair scraped against the floor. Daniel's voice changed. Not loud, worse. Flat. Who showed you what? No. Who? No. He took a breath and tried for softness. I need you honest with me right now because if Thomas has been feeding you fragments without context, he's endangering you, not helping. Feeding you fragments without context. Another way of saying reality arrived without permission. Anna said, What was the context of 4 years in that room? No answer. Julian tried to take the wheel back. The room was a private continuity environment. Not ideal, but safer than public collapse. Collapse for who? Anna asked. Again, silence. Price wrote something else. He had stopped leaning by now, all his focus bent forward toward the live feed. Anna pressed. Was I ever actually dangerous to Lily? There are pauses that courts should hear at full volume. That one lasted almost 3 seconds. Then Julian said carefully, Not in the simple language you're trying to force this into. Not no. Never no. Always classification instead of truth. Anna repeated, Was I dangerous to my daughter? Daniel answered this time, irritation finally bleeding through. You were impossible, Anna. I looked at Elise. She looked back once. There it was. Inside the suite, Daniel kept going. Every day was panic, blame, tears, false confessions, revisions, sleeplessness. Lily was small. The board was circling. Thomas was drowning in legacy and sentiment. Julian was the only adult in the situation, and he stopped. Maybe because he realized too late that he had stepped over the line from defense into authorship. Anna took the opening. So you put me in the carriage house, Julian said. We stabilized a liability. Liability, not daughter, not patient, not mother. Liability. Nick's eyes flicked to Elise through the van window. Even the tech man looked faintly sick. Anna's voice shook once. Only once. Was that the medical term? No answer. Then a third voice entered, Miriam. We heard the door, quick footsteps, and the papery authority of folders being set down on a table. What is taking so long? She said. Donors are already asking whether Anna will greet from the balcony before the film. Then, noticing the air, What happened? Daniel answered through his teeth. She's been talking to Thomas. Miriam exhaled sharply. Not panic, annoyance. Of course, this was bad for sequence. She said, Anna, whatever you think you know, today is not the day to test it. Sign the housekeeping amendments, do the room, thank the donors, and tomorrow we sit down like adults. Adults, meaning people whose version counts. Anna asked, Did any of you ever intend to let me out? Nobody answered directly. Miriam tried process. Julian tried language. Daniel tried hurt. Anna, he said, voice heavy now with manufactured injury, everything I have done has been to keep this family from burning a second time. That line almost made me put my fist through the van glass, but Anna answered beautifully, Then why did you need a porch switch? Dead silence. Beautiful. That was Elise's word later. Not because it sounded poetic, because it pinned the abstract to hardware. Why the porch switch? No one likes explaining machinery once the victim stops apologizing for noticing it. Julian made one last attempt at superiority. You're focusing on symbols because your mind is seeking villains. Anna answered, No, I'm focusing on equipment because equipment doesn't gaslight. Price underlined something so hard his pen snapped. Then Daniel said the sentence that changed the room from legally useful to morally naked. You stayed there because it was easier than facing what you were. There are admissions that come disguised as judgment. That was one. Not she chose treatment, not we had no option. You stayed there, meaning the room existed, meaning he knew it was a choice architecture, not medicine, meaning he believed shame made that distinction irrelevant. Anna stayed still. What was I? She asked. Daniel answered without hesitation. Expensive. No one in the van moved. He kept talking because some men hear themselves reveal and decide the only escape is to accelerate. You were guilt, volatility, donor risk, custody risk, board risk, and eventually asset delay. The room solved the worst of that. My vision narrowed. Beside me, Nora whispered, "Keep breathing." Inside the suite, Anna asked one more. "And Celia?" This time a woman's voice answered from the doorway. "Celia, alive, close, unhurried." "You really should have left Charleston out of this," she said. So she had been there too. Of course she had. Daniel wanted every moving part near the stage on opening night. Celia came farther into the room. We could hear her heels on the suite floor. "Anna," she said almost kindly, "the original plan was never for 4 years. It got extended because you were manageable once the cues settled. That isn't cruelty. That's adaptation. Adaptation." Price looked at Elise. Elise was already reaching for the warrant folder, but Anna kept going. Still inside the script we needed. "What was the original plan?" Celia gave a little laugh. "Minor fire, insurance pressure, sympathy bump. Daniel gets leverage over the district package. You get a brief therapeutic disappearance and come back grateful. Instead, you broke harder than expected. Thomas paid better than expected, and suddenly the ugly version made more financial sense." There it was. The whole thing laid bare by the woman who thought sophistication could cleanse confession. Minor fire, insurance pressure, sympathy bump, therapeutic disappearance. Paid better than expected. I closed my eyes once. Just once. Then opened them because I wanted every word fully conscious inside me. Anna asked, "And Lily?" Celia did not answer. Daniel did. "Lily kept you compliant." That was when Anna's voice changed, not louder, colder. "You used my daughter as a metronome." No one answered. Then Julian said, "Anna, enough." And Daniel, closer now, said, "Take the papers." We heard movement, fabric, folder opened, a pen clicked. Daniel again, low and dangerous now. "Sign the transfer and the proxy acknowledgement. We can fight about feelings later," Anna asked. "Or what?" Miriam answered this time. "Or we revisit custody exposure, public statements, and what happens when a woman with your documented instability accuses 4 professionals of conspiracy on gala night." There, the threat, at last cleanly named. Anna did not move. "If you cared about Lily," she said, "you would stop." Every unit in the van moved at once. Price was out the door before the sentence finished. Elise on comms, Nick calling line integrity and live capture. Plainclothes officers converging from ballroom, loading dock, and service hall. Nora already moving, me right behind her, because fatherhood and strategy can coexist for exactly 1 sentence before instinct takes the stairs. The family suite door did not explode open. That would have been theatrical. It opened with controlled violence. Price first, then 2 plainclothes officers, then Elise. Then me, despite everyone's better judgment. Inside, the room was beautiful in the way expensive rooms often are, right before they become evidence. Soft gold lamps, mirror panels, cream carpeting, the city glowing wet beyond tall windows. Folders open on the coffee table, 1 silver pen placed precisely over the signature page, champagne in an ice bucket no one had touched. A donor gift basket on the sideboard because rich institutions enjoy pretending crisis and hospitality can share a tray. And in the center of it all, Daniel Cross with one hand still extended toward my daughter, like the evening belonged to him. Price's voice cut the room in half. "No one move," Julian reacted first. Not because he was brave, because control addicts mistake motion for authority. "This is absurd," he said, stepping forward. "She is clinically fragile." An officer took him by the arm and sat him back down so hard his calm hit the carpet before his body did. Miriam started talking before the cuffs even appeared. Of course she did. Lawyers like her believe language can outrun momentum. "Detective, I strongly advise you to slow this down. You are walking into a family mental health matter with incomplete context." Elise answered from the doorway. "Good, then you'll enjoy hearing the complete context played back from the last 14 minutes. Miriam stopped speaking, just for a second. But I saw it. That tiny pause. The moment a professional realizes the room is no longer listening in the order she expected. Celia tried the practical exit. Always watch the practical ones. They do not perform innocence. They test doors. The officer at the hallway side caught her before she made 3 steps. Daniel did something worse. He turned to Anna. Not to the police. Not to the lawyer. Not to me. To Anna. "Do not do this," he said, voice low with a terrible intimacy. "You are blowing up Lily's life." That line would have hit her 3 days earlier, maybe even yesterday morning. But Anna stood under the sweet chandelier in a black gown with the wire still warm against her collar and said, "No, you built the explosion. I'm just refusing to stand in the fire this time." Price heard it. I heard it. And I think from the way he looked at her later, even Price understood how much of a victory that sentence was. The arrests inside the suite were only the first act. We had the evidence, we had the audio, we had the shell companies, the transfer traces, the Charleston photos, the carriage house documentation, the suppression analysis, the false clinical overlays, the proxy package, and enough fresh admissions to make even a careful prosecutor smile for private reasons. But Daniel had chosen Gala night for a reason. Audience, optics, momentum, history, public blessing. I had decided days earlier that if the building itself was going to witness the truth, it would witness all of it. So while Julian was being walked out through the service corridor muttering about privilege and therapeutic context, while Celia stared at the carpet like anger alone could turn handcuffs into jewelry, while Miriam demanded paper she already knew existed, I asked Elise one question. Do I still get my stage? She looked at me for half a second, then said, 3 minutes, maybe 4, use them. At 7:29, the donor film on Eleanor began. No one in the ballroom yet knew the family suite had turned. The guests were seated, rain tapping the high windows, steak service pending, board members at the center tables, developers 2 rows back, arts donors lined along the east side, press light and unofficial because Daniel wanted influence, not scrutiny. Eleanor's face filled the screen above the stage in black and white, young, fierce. One hand on a ladder during the grand restoration, hair tied up with a pencil because she said clips were for women with time to waste. Her recorded voice came through the speakers. We don't preserve buildings because they are old. We preserve them because they keep teaching us what kind of people we are when money arrives asking us to forget. Then the film cut to black. That was Nick in the booth, sharp as a surgeon. The house lights came up halfway, not full, just enough to make everyone blink. I walked onto the stage from house left. No introduction, no program cue, no donor-host smile. Murmurs started instantly because people can sense when a schedule has been disobeyed, and rich people especially hate unscripted timing. I stood center stage under the same light Daniel wanted for his redevelopment reveal and looked out at 300 faces waiting for language. I did not rush. That is the thing about true reversal. It does not need hurry. It needs ownership of tempo. Good evening, I said. I had planned to thank you for supporting this family and these buildings through difficult years. Instead, I'm going to tell you why tonight's final program item will not happen. The room went quiet, not politely, attentively. At the central board table, 2 trustees turned toward Miriam's empty seat. A donor near the aisle set down his fork. Bernadette, standing at the ballroom doors with 3 servers frozen behind her, looked exactly as satisfied as a woman can look while technically still on floral duty. I continued. For 4 years, many of you have heard a version of our family tragedy. You were told my daughter Anna entered private treatment after the Rosen Annex fire. You were told grief, guilt, and mental instability required distance. You were told resilience would one day bring her back to this room under compassionate terms. I let the words settle. Most of that was a lie. Gasps, then. Actual ones. Not metaphorical. The sort that ripple in strange pockets when people realize they may soon need to remember where they were sitting. On the far side of the room, Oak Ridge's lead partner leaned toward his counsel and whispered something furious. Good. I held up one folder. Inside this file are discharge records, proving my daughter left the Nova Scotia program after 5 months and was transferred not to continued medical care, but to a private outbuilding on my son-in-law's property in Pennsylvania. A louder wave of sound now. I held up a second. Inside this one are property records, financial transfers, and proxy drafts prepared to exploit her absence, my grief, and your trust in this institution, while a sale of the Mercer District was negotiated behind the language of stewardship. Then a third. And inside this one are documents and recordings showing that the woman my daughter was made to believe died in the fire did not die at all. That one hit like a dropped scaffold. Someone said, "What?" Someone else said too loudly, "Jesus Christ." A woman near the press side put her hand over her mouth. A trustee I had known for 16 years went gray around the jaw. Nick cut the projection screen from black to still images. Celia on the Charleston balcony, Daniel entering the condo, the carriage house porch light, the behavior note about child-linked compliance, the proxy draft, the sticky note in Daniel's handwriting about unresolved endings after light cue. No embellishment, no graphics, just evidence large enough for the room to stop pretending it was abstract. I heard Daniel shouting from the side corridor before he even reached the ballroom. He had slipped the service officers for 3 steps more than he should have and came in flanked by Price and another detective, fury finally stripping him clean of elegance. He shouted my name. Then, "This is insane." Then, "You are destroying your own family." Then, because panic makes men truthful in ugly little pieces, "Turn that screen off." I turned toward him. No, he was still in his tuxedo, still beautiful in the vulgar technical way polished men remain beautiful under disaster for about 60 seconds before reality starts ruining the fit. His hair perfect, bow tie straight, cuffs gleaming, handcuffs not yet on because Price, at my request, had delayed that particular image until the room had seen enough to deserve it. Daniel took one step forward. Price stopped him with a hand to the chest. He pointed at Anna, who now stood in the ballroom entrance beside Nora and Elise. "She's unstable," he shouted. "She was delusional then, and she's delusional now. Thomas is letting grief and guilt stage a spectacle because he cannot accept progress." At that, Anna walked into the room. Every eye turned. No donor video could have matched the force of that entrance. Not because she looked miraculous, because she looked real. No soft focus recovery montage, no curated fragility, no grateful invalid returning from the edge. Just my daughter in black, shoulders set, face pale, still carrying the room she had come from somewhere in her body but no longer shaped by it. She stopped 6 feet from Daniel. Then she said into the ballroom silence, "Tell them what the porch switch was for." He stared at her. Not prepared for that. Not in public. Not with witnesses. She said it again. "Tell them why you needed a light cue outside the carriage house." The room could hear him fail to answer. That silence alone was worth half a decade of polite lies. Anna kept going. "Tell them why you told me Celia was dead. Tell them why Julian billed my father for residential continuity after moving me into a locked room. Tell them why Lily's drawings were marked hold until stable tone. Tell them why the fire valves were manually closed. Tell them why Charleston mattered." Each question hit him in a different place. Equipment, money, child, fire, affair, method. Celia, halfway restrained near the service doors, shouted first, "Because you were easier that way." There are sentences no strategist can plan for because only contempt can deliver them with the necessary ugliness. The room recoiled audibly. Celia went on, voice sharp and cracked now, all the careful donor retreat smiles burned away. "You want truth, fine. The room worked. The story worked. Your father paid, Daniel got leverage, Julian kept you sedated enough to cooperate, and you stopped wrecking every plan with guilt and noise." Anna did not move. "So the room was for my convenience." "For everyone's," Celia snapped. "You were unbearable." Then Julian, handcuffed now in the rear aisle because Price had finally decided symbolism and procedure could shake hands, said the worst thing in the whole room. She was not a patient after the first 6 months. She was a containment problem. Even Daniel turned to look at him. That was the thing about collective cruelty. The alliances feel elegant only until one person believes the room is already lost and starts telling the truth as accusation. The ballroom went dead still. No forks, no whispering, no donor rustle, just 300 people hearing a psychiatrist define a human being the way a shipping company defines chemical spill risk. I let the silence live. Then I said into the microphone, "This building was restored by my wife with the specific belief that art should make liars uncomfortable. Tonight, for once, I think the building has done its job." I turned to the board tables. As of this moment, the Oak Ridge proposal is withdrawn from family support. Any proxy, trust amendment, or district redevelopment package prepared through Daniel Cross, Miriam Cole, or associated entities is rejected and will be challenged in court as fraudulent, coercive, and conflict-ridden. The Oak Ridge partner stood up. So did 2 board members. Everyone wanted process again because process feels safer than moral weather. Good. Let them have it. Just not the version Daniel wrote. Price moved then, clean in public, handcuffs on Daniel, Celia secured, Julian led out through the donor aisle. Miriam intercepted by a second detective before she reached the ballroom door. People shouted questions. Servers flattened themselves against walls. A woman from the Preservation Council started crying. Someone at the press table had the good sense to start taking notes instead of speaking. Daniel twisted once against the cuffs and shouted at me, "You think this saves her? You think daylight fixes what she is?" I stepped down from the stage until we were eye level. "No," I said, "but it does end what you are." That was the revenge, not the arrest, not even the exposure. Naming. Taking the words away from the man who had spent 4 years deciding what everyone else meant. After the ballroom chaos began to sort itself into law, donor panic, and institution-preserving statements, Anna found me backstage in the East Wing. For a second, we just stood there among cable runs and scene flats while sirens moved somewhere outside the loading dock. Then she asked, very quietly, "You always plan to do it in front of everyone?" "Yes." She looked toward the stage, toward the room where her life had just been dragged back through public light. "I'm angry about that," she said. "I know. I'm also relieved. I know." That almost made her smile. Almost. Then she said the sentence I had been waiting for since the suite turned. He doesn't own the story now. No, I said. He doesn't. She nodded, looked down at her hands, then back up. Good, and that was enough for that night. Not forgiveness, not recovery, not even peace. Just enough room, finally, for the future to stop being his property. The first truly quiet room after the arrests was not my kitchen, not the county offices, not even the Mercer Grand once the donors finally fled back to their cars and opinions. It was the old costume storage room on the third floor of the theater. Elise put Anna there while the police finished initial statements because it was the only room in the building with a door that closed softly. No mirrors, and enough distance from the ballroom that the aftermath sounded like weather instead of pursuit. I found her sitting on an overturned trunk beneath a shelf of labeled hat boxes no one had opened since before Eleanor got sick. She had kicked off her heels. Her feet were tucked under the hem of the black dress. One of the old space heaters clicked in the corner without actually producing much heat. The whole room smelled like cedar, starch, and forgotten applause. She looked up when I came in, then down again. I can still hear him, she said. Daniel. No, all of them. It's like once they started talking, the room put their voices everywhere. She rubbed both hands together. I know what happened. I know the facts, but my body still keeps waiting for the correction. Correction. That word had become so central to her captivity that ordinary language bent around it now. I sat on the trunk beside her, leaving enough space that the gesture did not become pressure. What would the correction be? That I misunderstood, that I'm dramatic, that context changes everything, that Lily pays for my confusion, that if I just calm down, the adults will explain it properly. I nodded. That sounds familiar. She gave me a side glance. Not funny. No. We sat with the heater clicking for a while. Then she asked, "Where's Lily?" The question had been coming toward us all night. I had arranged for Beth to take Lily straight to my house as soon as the ballroom turned because whatever else Daniel had taught that child, I wanted one thing clear. No 8-year-old needed to watch her father get arrested in a tuxedo between peonies and donor candles. She's at my place with Beth and Bernadette. Bernadette? Yes, Anna almost smiled. That feels safer than it should. It is safer than it should. She looked at the storage room wall for a long time. Will I be allowed to see her tonight? There it was again, aloud, permission reaching into ordinary love. I answered very carefully, "You are not asking Daniel anymore." She nodded once, then again, as if the sentence needed a second impact to become useful. Price stepped in 10 minutes later and asked for a statement, not a full deposition. Just enough to lock immediate charges cleanly and preserve the sequence before lawyers started doing what lawyers do when daylight turns their clients ugly. Anna gave it with a steadiness that made all of us look at her differently. Not because she was calm, because she was precise. She described the carriage house, the light cue, the journals, Lily's drawings, Julian's scripts, the fire night as she remembered it before Daniel and Julian translated it. Celia's voice in the suite, Daniel's sentence about her being expensive, Julian calling her a containment problem, Miriam's custody threat, every piece placed where it belonged. At one point, Price asked, "Why didn't you leave?" A hard question, necessary, cruel in the useful way law often is. Anna answered without self-pity. Because the room was built out of things I loved and feared at the same time. My daughter, my father, the fire, the possibility I had done irreversible harm. The longer I stayed, the more leaving looked selfish and staying looked responsible. She paused. If you build a prison out of guilt, the prisoner keeps guarding the door for you. Price wrote that down too. By 1 a.m, Daniel was in county holding, Celia in a separate unit, Julian under medical board emergency notice and criminal hold, Miriam released pending counsel, but with her devices seized and her office dark for the first time in years. The Oak Ridge people already in private damage control mode, the board in shock, the press salivating, the Mercer phones ringing themselves sick, and my daughter was asleep on my couch under one of Eleanor's blankets, while Bernadette sat in the armchair, reading messages out loud from outraged donors as if they were bad restaurant reviews. That first night home was not beautiful. Homecoming rarely is. Anna woke twice disoriented, and once because the refrigerator motor kicked on, and she thought, for one split second, it was the porch light relay outside the carriage house door. I heard the intake of breath from the hallway, and sat up in the chair before I was fully awake. "It's the fridge," I said through the dark. A long pause. Then, "I know." But her voice said she had only arrived at that knowledge a second after her body had already chosen fear. The next morning, Lily came downstairs wearing mismatched socks and carrying a sketch pad and stopped dead halfway through the kitchen when she saw her mother at the table. There is no training for that moment. No prosecutor, no detective, no law, no revenge, no board resolution, no trust amendment. Just a child and a mother, both standing at the edge of what other adults had done with their love. Anna had insisted on waiting for Lily to choose first, not because distance was wise, because she no longer trusted any movement not freely made. So she sat at the kitchen table in one of my old zip hoodies, with her coffee untouched and her hands folded too carefully in front of her. Lily looked at her, then at me, then back at Anna. "Are you staying where people can see you now?" she asked. Anna blinked hard once. "Yes." Lily nodded slowly, like this was a logistical update that had required years. "Good," she said. "The vent made your voice sound sad." Then she walked straight across the kitchen and wrapped both arms around her mother's middle so fast Anna almost didn't catch up in time to return it. I left the room, not because the moment belonged only to them, because some moments are too clean to survive a witness who loves both sides of them equally. I stood by the sink looking out at the wet backyard while I heard my daughter trying very hard not to cry directly over her child's head. Later, Lily asked the first honest question children always get to before adults do. "Did Dad know you were in there?" Anna looked at me. I looked back at her. There was only one answer, no softening it, no protecting the dead parts of anything. "Yes," Anna said. Lily considered that. Then she asked, "Then why did he say the bad quiet was helping?" Anna's shoulders went very still. How do you explain predation to an 8-year-old without handing her a vocabulary big enough to poison sleep? "You know how some people use nice words for mean things," Anna said carefully. "Your dad did that for a long time." Lily nodded, not understanding fully, but understanding enough. Children always understand enough when the lie finally changes temperature. By noon, Beth had quit. Not dramatically, not in outrage. She just called, crying, and said she had believed Daniel's line about Anna needing distance and thought the carriage house contained some kind of supervised private studio arrangement. She had never gone inside, had never seen the journals, had never known the light cues meant anything except signal discipline. She kept saying, "I should have asked more." I told her truthfully that everyone in our orbit should have asked more. That was the first hard civic lesson of the week. Daniel had not built the system alone. He had built it inside the comfort of other people's selective incuriosity. The second hard lesson arrived when the press finally broke the story in full. By evening, every station in the state had some version of it. Arts heiress hidden on family property, psychiatrist accused of coercive fraud, fake death tied to years-old theater fire, developer deal under investigation. Trust exploitation, possible insurance conspiracy, child leverage, secret condo, ballroom arrests. The headlines were a carnival. The facts beneath them were worse. The district attorney's office moved fast because public scandal has one accidental virtue: it clears bureaucracy. Price and Elise spent the next week extracting the case into clean charges: false imprisonment, coercive control-related exploitation, fraud, insurance conspiracy, financial abuse, obstruction, evidence suppression tied to the fire, medical billing misconduct, conspiracy to obtain signatures under duress, potential arson enhancement once Leon's reopened analysis cleared the evidentiary lane. The defense tried their first predictable strategy almost immediately. They said Anna remained a voluntary private patient. They said the carriage house had no bars. They said family complexity had been misread through grief. They said Daniel had sacrificed his own life to care for a difficult, traumatized spouse. They said Celia had survived the fire and chosen privacy because she feared publicity, not because she participated in fraud. They said Julian's language had been clinical shorthand. They said the gala had become a public delusion, fueled by my age, my sentimentality, and Anna's fragile state. Then Nick Patel cleaned up the sweet recording and played the line for Elise again. "You were expensive." The room solved the worst of that. After that, the defense had to stop pretending Daniel was a caregiver and start arguing about degrees of monstrosity instead. Daniel wrote to me from county holding on the 5th day. 3 pages, blue ink, still tidy. He said I had misread strategy as evil. He said institutions require decisions weaker men call cruelty. He said Anna needed containment because talent without structure becomes collapse. He said Lily would one day understand which adult had tried to keep her life intact. He said Oak Ridge would have stabilized the district and my public theatrics would bankrupt preservation for another generation. He said Eleanor had turned me sentimental and sentiment was now finishing the family business. I read the whole thing once, then handed it to Nora. She read the first paragraph, laughed without warmth, and said, "He writes like a man still trying to date the judge." We did not answer it. There's no point debating a con man at the exact moment the walls first become visible to him. Silence is better. Nothing insults manipulative certainty like being refused fresh material. Anna spent those first legal days moving between testimony sessions, sleep, sudden tears, and long silences that did not feel empty so much as structurally necessary. Sometimes she talked too much, sometimes not at all. Sometimes she sat at the piano in my living room and played one phrase over and over until Lily wandered in and announced, "That song needs an ending," which would make them both laugh and break at once. One afternoon, 7 days after gala night, Lily slammed her math workbook shut and asked, "If Mom lives here now, who gets the carriage house?" The question made the whole kitchen stop. Anna looked down. I set my fork down. Bernadette, who had apparently promoted herself to household logistics command without consulting any living male, lifted one eyebrow. "What do you think should happen to it?" I asked. Lily considered. "No one should get it," she said. "Rooms like that should be unemployed." That line went straight through me. Rooms like that should be unemployed. Children sometimes arrive at moral clarity with an efficiency grown people spend decades trying to imitate in essay form. I looked at Anna. She nodded slowly, once. "Then unemployed it is," I said. But I was not done with that building, not by a long stretch. The preliminary hearing took place 3 weeks after gala night in a courtroom so dull it felt almost insulting to the scope of what had happened. Beige walls, sealed windows, wood gone soft with use, a flag in the corner, a judge who had the kind of stillness that makes lawyers lower their volume whether they respect her or not. I had expected to feel triumph, or rage, or something larger. What I felt was administrative fury, because that is what court often does. It takes the wildest damage of your life and translates it into sequence numbers, exhibit stickers, foundational questions, and whether the witness has authenticated the photograph already marked as State's Exhibit 14A. Useful, necessary, strangely maddening. Daniel came in clean-shaven and thinner. County beige did nothing for him. Neither did the visible confusion he had not yet fully managed to turn back into charm. He still tried, of course. You could see it in the way he sat, in the little respectful tilt of the head toward counsel, in the careful face he wore whenever the judge looked in his direction. But something essential had gone. He no longer controlled the room temperature. That mattered. Julian looked angrier than frightened. Men like him cannot tolerate being downgraded from interpreter to defendant. Celia looked bored in the brittle way guilty people do when they think disdain can pass for detachment. Miriam, now separately represented, kept her face blank and her eyes moving because she understood better than the others that paper is what finally kills people like her. The state went first. Price authenticated the suite recording. Nick did the signal chain. Leon walked the fire anomalies. Dennis explained the money. Nora explained the trust architecture and why Anna's signature mattered. I described the transfers, the curtain at the gala, the carriage house, and the moment I heard my daughter ask whether Julian had sent me. Then Anna took the stand. It is impossible to describe that without sounding sentimental, but I will try not to insult it. She walked to the witness box under full light and sat down in a room where no one controlled her tone, her posture, her vent access, her porch cues, or her child. Then she swore to tell the truth and did. Not beautifully. Beautiful is for stories people already survived. She told it clearly. The fire, the medication, Julian on site, Daniel's narrative, Celia dead, the Nova Scotia facility, the transfer to the carriage house, the light cues, the journals, the child link compliance, the fear of custody exposure, the years slipping, the vent, the ballroom, the suite, the line about being expensive. The defense lawyer for Daniel, a careful silver-haired man who looked like he charged by the measured disappointment, tried the obvious path. "Mrs. Cross, isn't it true that you remained in the carriage property by agreement because you feared your own instability?" Anna did not rush to answer. That pause mattered. Everything paused now before she gave it away. "I remained there because fear had been engineered into duty," she said. "If you tell a mother often enough that leaving a room will destroy her child, she will eventually start calling the room responsible." Even the judge looked up harder at that. The lawyer tried again. "But no one physically chained you. No bars, no guards at the door 24 hours a day, no. So in what sense were you imprisoned?" Anna looked directly at him. In the sense that every exit had been preloaded with guilt, legal threat, medical authority, child leverage, and financial dependency, while the people controlling those things also controlled the story of why I was there. If your definition of prison requires iron and misses that, then your definition serves jailers. There was a murmur in the gallery. The judge shut it down with one glance. That answer went all the way through the hearing and out the other side of the week. It showed up in coverage, in legal blogs, in angry donor emails, in preservation board letters, in private texts from people who had spent years calling all sorts of emotional confinement complicated family matters, because naming them honestly might have required them to revisit their own houses. The judge bound the major counts over without much visible pleasure. Judges who enjoy doing that are dangerous in their own way. This one looked like a woman sorting metal. Probable cause on the confinement counts. Probable cause on fraud and conspiracy. Probable cause on insurance misconduct and obstruction. Expanded review on the original fire incident. Protective orders maintained. Asset motions to continue. Medical board emergency suspension of Julian's license upheld. When she recessed, she looked directly at Anna and said only this: "What happened to you was not treatment. No speech, no moral theater, just legal language finally aligned with reality." I think that sentence helped Anna more than the hearing itself, because law had once been one of the ghosts Daniel used to keep her still. Now it named her correctly in public. Not dramatic, not crazy. Not unstable, not difficult, not expensive, not treatment. After the hearing, Daniel did the thing some manipulative men cannot resist when their audience narrows. He asked to speak with me privately through counsel. Elise advised against it. Nora called it a vanity ambush. Price rolled his eyes. Anna said nothing. I agreed anyway. Not because I thought truth would arrive, because I wanted to see what remained once performance had lost most of its furniture. We met in an attorney room with a metal table bolted to the floor. A deputy outside, counsel present at first, then tactfully withdrawn to the hallway line once Daniel insisted all he wanted was a final family conversation. Family. Still that word. He looked tired now, actually tired. Not curated. No tuxedo, no ballroom, no donor light, just county dress clothes and the first real bruises around his ego. For 30 seconds, he said nothing. Then he asked, "Do you know what your wife would have done with the district if she'd seen the numbers?" I laughed. I couldn't help it. Not because it was funny, because some men will go to prison still believing the final open door is relevance. "You still think this was a board fight?" I said. He held my gaze. "No. I think board fights are what made the room possible." He leaned forward slightly. "You people worship legacy like it's a sacrament. Buildings, names, plaques, memory. Eleanor understood scarcity when she had to. You didn't. Anna didn't. The district needed consolidation and discipline. The fire gave me leverage. Her collapse gave me time. Your grief gave me money. I used what was available. There it was, no remorse, no hidden softness waiting to be excavated, just utility wearing a human face." "And Lily," I said. His eyes changed. "Not much, enough. I kept her fed, housed, educated, protected from instability. Protected from her mother. Protected from volatility." I leaned back. "You really don't hear it." "Hear what?" "That you're saying the same thing with different cufflinks." For the first time, real anger moved across his face. "You think you won because you embarrassed me in my own ballroom. Congratulations. You turned a private solution into public wreckage. Lily grows up in scandal now. Anna grows up in the mirror of what she allowed. The district loses clean redevelopment. You get your moral theater. Everyone applauds, then what? Then what?" That question follows revenge stories around like a debt collector. People think the answer must be peace. It rarely is. The truth is simpler. Then consequences. Then work. Then smaller truths. Then ordinary mornings. Then the long, expensive business of not letting the wrong people define what happened. I stood up. Then I said, "The room stays empty, and your voice gets smaller every year." That was the last private thing I ever said to Daniel Cross. Celia took a deal first. Of course she did. Practical people always do when the math turns. Insurance conspiracy, fraud, material participation in coercive confinement, false statements, reduced exposure in exchange for documentary cooperation, detailed timeline confirmation, and testimony against Julian and Daniel on the original plan. Her version of the truth was not generous. Useful, yes. Generous, no. She admitted the fire began as a contained scare Daniel pitched as pressure architecture. Suppressors manually delayed. Alarm on the east side disabled to buy smoke time. She was supposed to vanish temporarily after a staged injury and resurface later under a consulting alias once the insurance and sympathy window had been harvested. But Anna's visible collapse gave Daniel and Julian a more lucrative idea. Contain her, control her, charge Thomas for care, float the board through grief, slowly prepare the district transfer, use Lily when needed, keep Celia offshore from the family as a supposedly dead absence until the sale closed. Celia signed that story because by then she could see exactly how much Daniel had been planning to let her carry alone if things ever split. The Charleston condo had been in part her reward and in part her containment. Predators love accomplices until accomplices start resembling witnesses. Julian fought longest. Men who mistake language for innocence always do. He claimed he had practiced adaptive trauma containment under extreme family complexity. He claimed his notes were misread by people hostile to clinical nuance. He claimed the carriage house environment had been a voluntary transitional space. He claimed child-linked incentives were developmentally protective rather than coercive. He claimed the sweet recording captured metaphor stripped of therapeutic context. Then the state produced his billing records. The title changes, the shell group, the note about burden language if paternal contact became intrusive, the phrase containment problem, the line about her not being a patient after the first 6 months. When his attorney finally pivoted from innocence to damage control, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Miriam's bar hearing came later, not criminally spectacular, professionally fatal. She lost more than the law license. She lost the one thing her kind truly worship: credible access. There are lawyers who stand between chaos and ruin. Then there are lawyers who learn how to write ruin in fonts that reassure donors. Miriam belonged to the second category. After the trust drafts, custody threat notes, and signature scheduling tied to gala night came out, no respectable institution would have let her near a board packet with a 10-foot pole. Oak Ridge backed out within a week and publicly blamed family instability, which was cowardly and expected. Then, after the deeper financial links surfaced, they got much quieter. Developers always want culture until culture starts subpoenaing them. The Mercer board asked for my resignation once, then asked if I would stay. Then formed a special ethics committee because committees are what institutions create when moral failure needs stationery before it can be acknowledged honestly. I stayed long enough to kill every Daniel-era deal, restructure the voting protections, and write one new rule Eleanor should have put in herself years earlier. No spouse of a controlling share family member can hold unsupervised developer negotiating authority across preservation assets. No private clinical arrangement tied to a trustee family beneficiary can remain outside independent review. No compassionate family discretion can block direct board notice once control rights intersect with health claims. No more fog. Fog is where men like Daniel breed. Those months were full of ugly things: depositions, therapy intake, press corrections, asset freezes, tax lawyers, architects pausing plans because the district felt haunted, Lily asking whether court meant anyone could tell the truth if they sat in the right chair. But something cleaner ran alongside all of it. Ordinary life returning in ridiculous pieces. Anna choosing what cereal to buy without asking whether it would create patterns. Lily leaving notes on the refrigerator instead of whispering through vents. Bernadette deciding my guest room curtains were offensive and replacing them with something she called respectable widow recovery textiles. Gus showing up twice a week without permission to check on the damn piano. Nora eating takeout in my kitchen while redlining asset motions and occasionally reminding me that grief did not excuse poor sentence construction. Slow things. Useful things. The only kind that ever last. And through all of it, the carriage house sat at the edge of Daniel's property under court seal like a stage waiting for strike. I thought about it more than I liked. Not obsessively, mechanically. The porch light, the override box, the inner partition, the piano, the vent, the journals, the shelf of Lily's drawings marked hold until stable tone. I did not want that building preserved as evidence one day longer than law required. But I also did not want it gone before Anna got to decide what its ending should be. That matters. Endings should not be given back to rescuers by default. Not even fathers. Sometimes, especially not fathers. So when the county finally released the property for remediation and transfer proceedings 9 months later, I asked Anna a question over coffee at my kitchen table. What do you want done with the carriage house? She did not answer immediately. Lily, coloring on the other end of the table, answered first. Fire it into the sun. Bernadette at the stove, because by then she had all but annexed breakfast in my house, said, tempting, but zoning may object. Anna smiled faintly, then looked at me. Not fire, she said. They already used that once. Fair enough. So what? She thought for a long time, then said, I want the cues removed first. Every one. I want to see the room without instructions in it before it becomes anything else. That was the right answer. Of course it was. She did not want demolition first. She wanted authorship. So that became the second half of the revenge, not the state's, ours. We were going to strip the script before we struck the set. The first thing we removed from the carriage house was the porch light relay. Gus insisted on that. Said you always kill bad power at the source. He arrived on a Saturday morning in work boots, carrying 2 screwdrivers, a pry bar, and the kind of satisfaction craftsmen rarely admit out loud when a symbolic object has finally become literal enough to unscrew. Anna stood beside him in jeans and a canvas jacket, Lily in oversized safety goggles, me holding a coffee I forgot to drink, Nora leaning against the fence because she said if anyone was going to perform justice with hardware, she wanted a front row view. Bernadette there too, naturally, because she considered herself an expert in both arrangements and conclusions. The property transfer had gone through cleanup enough that Daniel no longer had any legal say over the building. The seal was off, the lock changed, the evidence teams done, the district attorney satisfied, the room ours to name now. Gus pointed at the porch fixture. Still want this first? Anna nodded. He opened the outer box with one twist. Inside sat the relay Daniel had wired to the switch system. Small, ugly, unremarkable. That was always the insulting part about tools of control, how petty they looked once taken out of their system. Gus stepped back and handed Anna the screwdriver. Your cue, he said. She took the tool, looked at the box for a long second, then removed the relay herself and held it in her palm like a dead insect. Lily peered up from behind the goggles. That tiny thing did all that. Anna looked down at it, then at Lily. No, she said. People did, that just helped. Good answer, better than mine would have been. We went inside next. Daylight changed the carriage house, not by improving it, by insulting it. The room had been built to work through managed atmosphere, soft lamps, selective access, artificial calm. When you open curtains fully and let winter sun in, control loses some of its costume. The outer room looked smaller than memory. The inner room looked crueler. We moved carefully, not because we were afraid of the walls, because taking apart a bad room is not the same as winning. It is archaeology with feelings and exposed wiring. Anna wanted every cue removed first. The ceiling speaker, the camera domes, the partition deadbolt, the vent grate, the shelf labels, the behavior charts, the porch box, the light switch override, the fixed lamp in the inner room, the little tray stand Daniel used for food and medication delivery. We put everything on a work table Gus had dragged in from the scene shop, one item at a time, like evidence, like confession, like strike inventory after a long, ugly show. When Gus pried the deadbolt plate off the partition door, the wood underneath showed darker where it had been compressed for years. Anna touched the outline with 2 fingers. I used to hear this click in my sleep before he ever turned it. No one answered. Some truths do not require commentary, just witnesses. Then came the journals, boxes of them, more than I knew, more than Anna remembered. Years of coached guilt, restricted language, compliance reflections, child access notes, tone reviews, and carefully curated versions of events Daniel and Julian wanted fixed inside her. Price had already copied them for the criminal case. The originals were legally released back through property transfer. Anna insisted on reading some before we destroyed anything. So we sat on the outer room floor under full daylight and read. It was one of the most difficult things I have ever watched, because the journals were not just evidence of pain. They were evidence of intelligence used against itself. Page after page of my daughter trying to become the version that would earn her another drawing, another 10 minutes near the vent, another less medicated week, another conversation not categorized as selfish regression. If my tone remains level, Lily may hear me practice. Julian says the room is a form of love I am too reactive to understand. Daniel says Dad's visits would only make the guilt noisier. I'm trying to deserve distance. I'm trying to be cheaper. I'm trying not to make the family carry my instability. If I complete 6 calm weeks, maybe the porch light will stop meaning silence and start meaning trust. Cheaper. That word made Lily put her crayons down. She had been drawing in the corner of the rug while the adults did adult things around a dead room. What does that mean? She asked. Anna closed the journal very gently. It means I was using the wrong words for myself. Lily frowned, then said, Good, those words are ugly. Children really do sometimes save us from abstraction. A whole decade of therapy language could not do better than that. Those words are ugly. We did not destroy the journals that day. Anna said no. She wanted them archived, not hidden, not on public display, not as a family shrine to damage, but not gone either. Gone would let them feel unreal, she said. I want them somewhere future me can choose to ignore, not somewhere Daniel gets to erase by having lost. Again, the right answer. So Nora arranged sealed archival storage with restricted personal access and legal copy certification. That is her idea of tenderness, paper that cannot be quietly rewritten later. The second stage of the strike was the partition wall. Gus, with the wicked pleasure of an old stage carpenter finally being allowed to destroy a bad set, marked the studs and asked Anna where she wanted the first cut. She pointed to the middle seam, the exact place where the inner room had looked smallest from the outer one. Not symbolic, practical. It would collapse the worst geometry first. Gus handed her the hammer. A short one, good weight. She looked at the wall, at the seam, at the room behind us, at Lily, who stood back near me in the huge goggles and a yellow scarf because Bernadette insisted dust makes people sloppy. Then Anna drove the hammer through the drywall. The sound surprised all of us. Not triumphant, crude, a body sound, like the building coughing up the first honest thing it had said in years. She hit it again and again. Gus widened the break. I took the pry bar. Danny from Bay 2 at the scene shop, who had been offended not to be invited to morally significant demolition, arrived midway through with a respirator and no explanation, and joined the lower studs without asking permission. Soon the partition began coming apart in hands, dust, plaster, wood, and screws. When the first open sight line ran from the outer room clear through to the former inner wall, Lily clapped. "You can see all of it now," she said. "Exactly." That was the point. No more staged outer room, no more hidden second half. See all of it now. We stripped the wall to the studs, removed the deadbolt, pulled the fixed lamp, opened the window casings, removed the speaker wire, took out the extra insulation Daniel had used to muffle sound. Every layer made the room less sophisticated and more pathetic. By noon, the carriage house no longer looked like a therapeutic suite. It looked like what it had always been underneath. A normal outbuilding someone had turned mean with enough money and vocabulary. That afternoon, Anna asked to be alone in it for 10 minutes. Price, who still checked in on the property as the criminal matter moved toward plea and trial phases, advised caution. Nora deferred to me. I deferred to Anna. So everyone went outside. I waited in the yard by the birch line while she sat inside the open room with the Baldwin and the winter light and the dust still drifting where the partition used to be. At first there was no sound, then piano, not one of Eleanor's pieces, not Anna's old practice fragments. Something new, slow, uncertain in the first bars, then firmer. A theme built around interruption and then refusal of interruption. Not polished, not finished, but hers. Lily tugged at my sleeve. "Is that a song?" "Yes." "What's it called?" I looked toward the open doorway. "I don't know yet." When Anna came out, her face was dusty and strangely calm. "What did you play?" I asked. She shrugged. Probably the first honest thing that room ever heard. The building itself was gone by spring. Not sold as is, not gently repurposed. Gone. We saved the Baldwin, the window frames. One length of original beam Gus insisted had beautiful grain under the lies, and the porch light housing at Anna's request. Not to keep it as itself, she said, to change its job. Gus restored the housing in his workshop and turned it into a reading lamp for the new upstairs practice room at my house. Soft amber, no relay, no external control, just a switch Anna wired herself. That is what symbolic revenge looks like when it grows up, not smashing everything, reassigning function. The district attorney's office liked our strike plan so much, they asked to photograph stages of it for victim impact documentation and later training on coercive control environments that rely on domestic aesthetics rather than obvious restraints. Elise called the carriage house a model in how abuse borrows the visual grammar of care. That sentence made 3 reporters write as if they had thought it first. I hated them all and admired the accuracy. Daniel pleaded not guilty for months, then not quite guilty, then strategically repentant, then furious again when Celia's cooperation and Julian's records kept narrowing the room he had left to lie in. His trial on the major counts started the following winter. Celia testified first. Useful, bitter, and very careful not to make herself sound more romantic than criminal. Julian came next after eventually taking a partial plea tied to fraud and licensing crimes rather than risk the full confinement narrative at trial. He testified like a man handing over organs one measured sentence at a time and still trying to invoice for surgery. The most devastating witness, unexpectedly, was Gus. Not because carpenters are magical. Because ordinary men describing physical facts are murder on sophisticated defenses. He explained the porch relay, the partition geometry, the outside deadbolt, the sound dampening, the cue logic, and the way the building had been retrofitted not for treatment but for controllable observation. No rhetoric, no pity, no moral flourish, just construction truth. Then Anna testified again, stronger this time, still not easy, never easy. At one point Daniel's counsel, cornered and ugly, asked whether part of her had remained because the carriage house reduced the burden of public responsibility. I thought Elise might object before Anna could answer. She didn't. Anna looked directly at the jury and said, "Yes, that is how coercion works when it's done well. It offers relief from one pain in exchange for your entire life. The fact that relief felt real sometimes is not proof the room was voluntary. It is proof they understood pressure better than mercy." You could feel the room change around her. That was the second kind of revenge, not public humiliation this time. Correction of record. Daniel wanted the story to end with Anna forever contaminated by the room. Instead, she taught 12 strangers how the room had worked. He was convicted on the major counts, not every count. Real life is rarely that neat, but enough. Fraud, coercive confinement, conspiracy, evidence manipulation tied to the fire, financial exploitation, attempted unlawful proxy acquisition under duress. Related child coercion factors considered at sentencing, though not separately charged in the cinematic way people online always want. He got years, real ones, not symbolic months, not country club supervision, years. Julian got fewer, but enough that he will never again sit across from a frightened family and sell management as medicine. Celia got less than either because she cooperated early and because the law often loves structure more than justice. Miriam lost her practice and most of her clients before the disciplinary order even finished printing. I would be lying if I said those numbers healed anything. They did not. Prison math does not rebuild trust. It does not return 4 years. It does not teach a child why her father chose systems over souls. It does not make a mother feel native to her own life again. But consequences matter because without them the world starts teaching the wrong lesson. That polish is immunity. That if your documents are orderly enough and your language clinical enough, you can keep a human being in a room and still call yourself the responsible adult. No, not if I had anything left to say about it. A year after Gala night, the Mercer Grand reopened its east balcony under a new brass plaque. Not to me, not to Eleanor, not to legacy in the pompous donor sense. To the stagehands, musicians, dressers, electricians, and carpenters who keep houses alive after rich people stop posing in them. It was Anna's idea. Daniel loved ownership language, she said. I'd rather dedicate something to labor. So we did. By then, she was back in the organization 3 days a week. Not in the old role. Not because she could not have handled it eventually. Because she no longer wanted to stand anywhere Daniel had once planned for her without deciding the terms from scratch. She designed education programming, worked on community rehearsal grants, advised restoration acoustics, played piano again in empty rooms first, then in staff run-throughs, then once, quietly, at a spring donor breakfast where half the board pretended not to cry into their coffee. Lily had stopped whispering through vents and started leaving notes on the refrigerator. Some were normal. Need poster board. Can I have a sleepover? Grandpa forgot to buy strawberries. Some were not. No one is allowed to use nice words for mean things in this house. Mom says unfinished songs are still songs. If I get scared at night, can I sleep in your room even if I am 9 and not 5? Those notes stayed up until the corners curled. I could not bear to take them down. One afternoon in June, almost exactly a year after the arrests, Lily threw a toy rabbit at the hallway wall and shouted, "You don't get to tell me what to do just because you came back." The whole house went quiet. I was in the kitchen. Anna was at the table sorting old preservation grant files. Bernadette was theoretically only visiting for lunch, but had somehow ended up reorganizing my pantry. And my daughter, who a year earlier might have folded into guilt so fast you could hear the old room click shut inside her, stayed where she was. She looked at Lily and said, "You're right about one thing. I don't get to act like time didn't happen, but I still get to be your mother." Lily burst into tears immediately. Anna did not overtalk it, did not rush to fix the feeling away, did not trade truth for peace. She just stayed there. Later that night, I told her it was the best parenting I had seen in years. She looked down at her hands and said, "It felt awful." I nodded. That usually means it was real. Healing is not a straight line. I know people put that on mugs and clinic brochures until the phrase feels decorative. But it is true. Healing is not a straight line. It is a room you keep rebuilding because you finally get to choose the walls. Some weeks Anna slept badly. Some weeks she had no patience for soft music or donor gratitude or any sentence beginning with "at least." Some nights the new reading lamp made from the old porch housing had to be switched off because the shape of it brought back the wrong breath. Some mornings Lily wanted every grown-up in one room and once asked, with total seriousness, whether trust grows back like fingernails or more like trees. Worse than fingernails, Bernadette told her over toast. Better than trees. No one improved on that. The legal work kept going in the background. Asset recovery from the shells, insurance recapture proceedings, board restructuring, civil claims against Daniel's consulting network. Medical board reforms pushed by Elise's office after the Reddick case became a small professional scandal with large implications. Training modules for recognizing coercive domestic medical setups. Quiet letters from families in 3 states who had seen parts of themselves in the coverage and wanted to know whether weird care with too much paperwork was still weird if nobody had yet found the room. That part surprised me least and hurt me most. Once the story was public, people started bringing us their near versions. Not identical, never identical, but close enough to recognize the grammar. A son moved for his own good after a bad fall and somehow never handled his own phone again. A wife whose medication changes always seemed to coincide with estate revisions. A daughter whose panic only ever required silence when investors were visiting. A man whose therapist spoke to the family more than to him and somehow billed everyone for peace. Turns out Daniel Cross had not invented the method. He had just executed his version with theater money and a wife smart enough to make captivity worth financing. Sometimes I think that is part of why I stayed as vocal as I did after the trial. Not because I enjoy public righteousness. I don't. It gives me hives. But because once you see the trick, your responsibility changes. You stop calling it a complicated family situation when a controlled person keeps shrinking under the same phrases. You stop calling it privacy when every question routes through the same gatekeeper. You stop admiring calm when calm only ever serves the powerful person in the room. That was the real gift of revenge, if the word must be used. Clarity. Daniel thought revenge would mean rage, humiliation, a ruined gala, a destroyed sale, handcuffs under house lights. Those happened, fine. But the deeper revenge was this. He lost the right to define sophistication. He built a polished system and taught everybody around him to confuse elegance with care. Then we took that system apart in public and made it look exactly as crude as it had always been. No one quotes his legacy stewardship language now. No one remembers his donor scripts. No one asks what Oak Ridge might have built with cleaner access to the district. No one in any room that matters says Anna was unstable and Daniel merely overcompensated. His words did not survive him. That matters to me more than prison years, more than seized assets, more than the Charleston condo getting sold under court order to pay restitution and costs. A predator who loses the afterlife of his language loses the only immortality he was actually capable of. The final image I keep is not the trial, not the ballroom, not the porch relay coming off in Anna's hand, not even Daniel's face when the screen at the Grand showed Celia alive while the room finally stopped believing in his version of competence. It is smaller than all that. It is a Sunday evening in early summer. The windows at my house open because the rain finally stopped and the air smells like wet stone and basil from the pots Lily refuses to water on schedule. I am at the stove making sauce the way Eleanor used to, which is to say with too much garlic and absolute faith in improv. Bernadette is on the porch pretending not to supervise the herb cutting. Nora is at the table redlining a nonprofit charter because apparently some people retire only cosmetically. Gus is in the hall insisting the new practice room door needs another 1/8 of an inch shaved off the bottom, even though it absolutely does not. And in the living room, Anna is at the piano. Not the little practice keyboard. Not the carriage house Baldwin rescued from the room. The full grand we finally moved in after the upstairs floor joists were reinforced, and Nora threatened to sue my common sense if I pretended the house could keep surviving on symbolic restraint. Lily is beside her on the bench, playing all the wrong notes with complete authority. Anna keeps stopping to show her where Middle C lives, and Lily keeps deciding Middle C should move because it looks bored there. I look up from the stove and watch my daughter laugh. Not the careful laugh of a person trying to prove she can still make one, a real one. Brief, unmanaged, her own. Then Lily holds up a page from her sketchbook and says, "Look, it shows a theater, not exact. Children do not do exact when truth is more useful, but close enough. Big stage, tall curtains, people in the wings, a piano, a little brass lamp in the corner with light coming from it. No carriage house, no partition, no vent, no porch switch, no extra room inside the room. Across the top, she has written in uneven green letters, no more cues from bad people. That is the ending I believe in. Not because the law fixed everything, it did not. Not because prison years balance a ledger made of seasons and a child's first questions, they do not. Not because a building changed hands back toward decency. Buildings can be lost again. I believe in that ending because it contains the one correction Daniel could never control. My daughter came back in her own voice. That is what he never understood. Rooms do not win forever. Not if someone keeps naming the walls. Not if a child tells the truth at the right terrible moment. Not if the people who finally see the trick refuse to keep calling it love. For a long time, I thought the opposite of captivity was freedom. I do not think that anymore. The opposite of captivity is authorship. The right to say what happened. The right to name the room. The right to decide which objects stay, which ones change jobs, and which ones never get to become doors again. The right to tell your daughter she is not what was done to her. The right to tell your granddaughter that nice words for mean things still count as mean things. The right to stand in an old theater under full house lights and refuse someone else the ending they planned for you. That is what we took back. And if you ask me what revenge finally looked like, I would tell you this. It looked like an audience of donors hearing the truth on the stage Daniel wanted for his triumph. It looked like a psychiatrist losing the language he used as camouflage. It looked like a dead woman walking back into her own name just in time to bury the man who kept her profitable. It looked like a carriage house stripped of every cue. It looked like a child no longer whispering through a vent. It looked like my daughter pausing in the middle of a song because she wanted to, not because a porch light told her to. That is enough for me, more than enough. And when the evening gets quiet now, sometimes Anna still plays the same 4 notes she used to tap on the wall as a little girl. Come hear this. Only now there is no wall, no correction coming, no one outside the room deciding whether she gets to finish. So I go. Every time. I go and listen. And this time, finally, the song ends where she wants it to.